This is the story of the Khmer Empire, a civilization that rose from river valleys to command the hearts and lands of millions, leaving behind monuments so grand that they continue to whisper their secrets to those who know how to listen. Long before the first stone of Angkor Wat was laid, before the god-kings walked among mortals, and before the great reservoirs reflected the sky, the land that would become the Khmer Empire was already alive with human ambition and divine dreams. The story begins not with kings or temples, but with rivers and rice, with monsoons and myths, with the slow gathering of peoples who would eventually forge one of history's most remarkable civilizations. The Mekong River, that great serpent of water that winds through Southeast Asia, provided the lifeblood for these early settlements. Along its banks and in the fertile plains it nourished, communities began to form as early as 4,000 years before the Common Era. These weren't yet the Khmer as we know them, but their ancestors, people who had learned to read the rhythms of flood and drought, who understood that the land's generosity came in cycles, and who began to develop the agricultural techniques that would one day feed an empire. Archaeological evidence from sites like Samrong Sen reveals a sophisticated understanding of metalworking by the first millennium before the Common Era. Bronze drums, intricate jewellery, and agricultural tools speak of communities that had moved beyond mere survival into the realm of artistic expression and technological innovation. These early peoples were already trading with distant lands, their boats navigating the waterways that connected them to the wider world of Southeast Asia and beyond. The ethnic composition of these early communities was remarkably diverse. Mon Khmer-speaking peoples mingled with Austronesian seafarers, while influences from the Indian subcontinent began to filter in through trade networks that stretched across the Bay of Bengal. This cultural mixing would become a defining characteristic of Khmer civilization, a willingness to absorb and transform foreign influences into something uniquely their own. By the first centuries of the Common Era, the political landscape of the lower Mekong region had begun to coalesce into more organized structures. Small chiefdoms grew into principalities, and principalities began to form alliances and federations. The Chinese chronicles, those meticulous records kept by imperial historians, begin to mention a kingdom they called Funan, though this was likely not what its inhabitants called their land. The name probably derives from the Khmer word Phonom, meaning mountain, suggesting that even in these early times, the sacred mountain held special significance for the people of the region. Funan emerged as the dominant power in the Mekong Delta region sometime in the 1st century of the Common Era. Its capital, possibly located at the archaeological site of Okio in what is now southern Vietnam, was a marvel of urban planning for its time. Canals crisscrossed the landscape, serving both as transportation routes and irrigation channels. These waterways, some extending for dozens of kilometres, demonstrate an engineering capability that would later flourish in the great works of Angkor. The wealth of Funan came from its strategic position astride the maritime trade routes between India and China. Ships laden with precious goods would stop at Funanese ports, where merchants exchanged Chinese silk for Indian cotton, Roman gold for Southeast Asian spices. The kingdom grew rich on these exchanges, and with wealth came cultural sophistication. Sanskrit inscriptions begin to appear in the archaeological record, indicating the adoption of Indian writing systems, and more significantly, Indian religious and political concepts. The introduction of Hinduism and Buddhism to the region through Funan marked a transformative moment in the development of Khmer civilization. These religions brought not just new gods and rituals, but entire systems of thought about kingship, society, and the cosmos. The concept of the Devaraja, the god king who served as intermediary between the human and divine realms, would become central to Khmer political ideology. The Hindu epics, the Ramayana and Mahabharata, provided narrative frameworks that Khmer artists would elaborate upon for centuries to come. Yet Funan was not simply a passive recipient of Indian culture. The kingdom's rulers and artists adapted these foreign elements to local conditions and beliefs. The indigenous worship of ancestors and nature spirits continued alongside the new religions, creating a syncretic spiritual landscape that was distinctly Southeast Asian. The Naga, the serpent deity that appears so prominently in later Khmer art, represents this fusion perfectly, combining Indian mythological concepts with local beliefs about water spirits and fertility. The social structure of Funan, as revealed through Chinese accounts and archaeological evidence, already showed many features that would characterize the later Khmer Empire. At the apex stood the king, surrounded by a court of officials and priests. Below them were the merchants and artisans who kept the economy functioning, and at the base the vast majority of the population consisted of farmers and fishermen whose labour supported the entire structure. Slavery existed, though it appears to have been less harsh than in many contemporary societies, with slaves able to own property and sometimes purchase their freedom. The 6th century brought significant changes to the political landscape of the lower Mekong region. Funan's power began to wane, possibly due to changes in trade routes, internal conflicts, or environmental factors. The Chinese chronicles speak of upheavals and succession disputes that weakened the kingdom's central authority. Into this power vacuum stepped Chenla, initially a vassal state of Funan located further inland along the Mekong River. Chenla's rise to prominence marks an important shift in the region's centre of gravity, from the coastal areas to the interior. This movement inland would eventually lead to the establishment of Angkor in the Tonle Sap Basin, the heartland of the future Khmer Empire. The reasons for this shift are complex and probably involved multiple factors. The interior offered better protection from seaborne raids, more reliable water sources for agriculture, and perhaps most importantly, it was closer to the sources of valuable forest products, like aromatic woods and resins that were highly prized in international trade. Under rulers like Jayavarman II and his successor Mahendravarman, Chenla expanded its territory through a combination of military conquest and diplomatic marriages. These kings were great builders, constructing temples that, while modest compared to later Angkorian monuments, showed increasing sophistication in design and decoration. The Temple of Sambor Praekuk, built during this period, features elaborate carved lintels and sophisticated architectural elements that prefigure the glories of Angkor. The political structure of Chenla appears to have been less centralized than that of Funan. Regional lords exercised considerable autonomy, owing allegiance to the king but maintaining their own courts and armies. This decentralized system had both advantages and disadvantages. It allowed for flexibility and local adaptation, but also made the kingdom vulnerable to fragmentation. Indeed, by the early 8th century, Chinese sources speak of land Chenla and water Chenla, suggesting a division of the kingdom, though the exact nature of this split remains debated among historians. During the Chenla period, we see the full development of many cultural elements that would define classical Khmer civilization. The Khmer script, derived from the Pallava script of South India, was standardized and used for both Sanskrit and Old Khmer inscriptions. These inscriptions, carved on temple doorposts and stone steles, provide invaluable information about political events, religious donations, and social life. They speak of kings who claimed descent from the legendary Indian dynasties, of queens who wielded considerable power, of monks and priests who served as advisors and educators. The religious landscape of Chenla was remarkably diverse. Shaivism, the worship of the Hindu god Shiva, was particularly popular among the elite, with many kings taking names that incorporated Varman, meaning protected by, followed by the name of their chosen deity. But Vaishnavism, centered on the god Vishnu, also had adherents, as did various forms of Buddhism. Local cults continued to flourish, with sacred springs, mountains, and trees receiving offerings alongside the great Hindu and Buddhist deities. Art from the Chenla period shows increasing sophistication and the development of distinctive Khmer styles. Sculptures of deities become more naturalistic, with a subtle modelling of forms that suggests close observation of human anatomy. The characteristic Khmer smile, that enigmatic expression that would reach its apex in the Bayon faces, begins to appear. Architectural decoration becomes more elaborate, with intricate patterns of foliage and geometric designs covering available surfaces. The economy of Chenla, like that of Funan before it, was based primarily on agriculture, specifically wet rice cultivation. The annual flooding of the Mekong and its tributaries deposited rich silt on the fields, ensuring good harvests in most years. But the Chenla period also saw the beginning of more intensive agricultural techniques, including the construction of small reservoirs and canals to control water distribution. These early experiments in hydraulic engineering would be vastly expanded during the Angkorian period. Trade continued to be important, though perhaps less central than it had been for coastal Funan. Chenla controlled important overland trade routes that connected the Mekong region with the kingdoms of what is now Thailand and Burma. Forest products, particularly aromatic woods and resins used in religious ceremonies and medicine, were major exports. In return, the kingdom imported luxury goods like Chinese ceramics and Indian textiles, as well as religious texts and artistic models that influenced local production. The military organisation of Chenla laid the groundwork for the formidable Khmer armies of later centuries. Inscriptions mention various military titles and units, suggesting a reasonably organised force. Elephants, those living tanks of ancient warfare, played a crucial role, with the king's war elephants being specially trained and equipped. Infantry carried spears and shields, while archers provided ranged support. Naval forces operated on the rivers, using boats that could be quickly assembled or disassembled for overland transport. By the late 8th century, the political situation in the former Chenla territories had become increasingly fragmented. Various princes and local lords claimed independence or supremacy, leading to a period of conflict and instability. Some areas fell under the influence of the Sailendra dynasty of Java, while others were threatened by the expanding power of the kingdom of Champa to the east. It was a time of crisis, but as often happens in history, crisis created the conditions for transformation. The stage was set for the emergence of a leader who could reunite the fragmented Khmer lands and forge them into something greater than what had come before. That leader would be Jayavarman II, and his achievement would be nothing less than the foundation of the Khmer Empire proper, the beginning of the Angkorian period that would see Khmer civilization reach unprecedented heights of power and cultural achievement. The pre-Angkorian period, encompassing both Funan and Chenla, was far more than just a prelude to later glories. It was a time of foundation laying, of cultural synthesis, of experimentation with forms of government, religion, and art that would be refined and perfected in subsequent centuries. The peoples of this era created the vocabulary, both literal and metaphorical, that their descendants would use to write one of history's most remarkable chapters. In the early years of the 9th century, when the former territories of Chenla lay divided and vulnerable, a prince emerged from across the seas with visions of unity and divine mandate. Jayavarman II, whose name would echo through centuries as the founder of the Khmer Empire, returned from Java carrying not just ambitions of power, but a revolutionary concept of kingship that would transform the political and spiritual landscape of Southeast Asia forever. The circumstances of Jayavarman's time in Java remain shrouded in historical uncertainty, with inscriptions providing only tantalizing hints about this formative period. Some sources suggest he was held as a hostage at the Sailendra court, perhaps taken during Javanese raids on the mainland. Others propose he went voluntarily, either as an exile fleeing political turmoil, or as a young prince sent for education at one of the great centres of Buddhist and Hindu learning. Whatever the truth, his years in Java exposed him to sophisticated concepts of statecraft and sacred kingship that the Sailendra dynasty had perfected. Java in the 8th and early 9th centuries was experiencing its own golden age. The Sailendra rulers had constructed Borobudur, that magnificent mountain of carved stone that represents the Buddhist cosmos in architectural form. They had also developed elaborate court rituals that emphasized the divine nature of kingship, with the ruler serving as the earthly manifestation of divine will. These ideas, filtered through Jayavarman's own understanding and adapted to Khmer traditions, would become fundamental to his new vision of empire. The young prince's return to the Khmer lands, probably around the year 790, found a region in desperate need of strong leadership. The old order had collapsed, with various local rulers claiming authority over fragments of the former Chenla kingdom. Some areas had fallen under foreign domination, while others were plagued by constant warfare between competing factions. The agricultural systems that depended on coordinated maintenance of irrigation works were falling into disrepair, threatening the food supply and economic foundation of society. Jayavarman began his campaign of reunification not from a position of established power, but as one claimant among many to the legacy of Chenla. His initial power base appears to have been in the region of Indrapura, in what is now eastern Cambodia. From there, he embarked on a series of military campaigns that would occupy much of his long reign. These were not mere wars of conquest, but a systematic program of reunification that combined military force with diplomatic marriage alliances and religious legitimation. The inscriptions that record Jayavarman's campaigns speak in the flowery language of Sanskrit poetry, making it difficult to extract precise historical details. Yet through the metaphors and hyperbole, we can discern the outline of a methodical strategist who understood that lasting power required more than military victory. Each conquered territory was integrated into a growing administrative structure, with loyal officials appointed to govern in the king's name. Local rulers who submitted peacefully were often allowed to retain their positions, now as vassals of the emerging empire. One of Jayavarman's most significant innovations was his approach to religious authority. Rather than simply claiming divine favour as previous rulers had done, he instituted a new cult that placed the king at the very centre of cosmic order. This was the cult of the Devaraja, often translated as God King, though the concept was more subtle than this translation suggests. The Devaraja was not simply the king as God, but rather a divine essence of kingship that resided in a sacred linga, a phallic symbol representing Shiva's creative power, which was spiritually united with the person of the king. The establishment of this cult required elaborate rituals and the participation of Brahmin priests who possessed the necessary knowledge of Sanskrit texts and ceremonial procedures. Jayavarman recruited these specialists, some from the local Khmer priesthood and others possibly from India itself, to create a religious framework that would support his political ambitions. The rituals they performed were not mere ceremony, but were believed to maintain the cosmic order that ensured prosperity and protection for the kingdom. The geographic progression of Jayavarman's power can be traced through the locations mentioned in inscriptions. From Indrapura, he moved westward into the heartland of what would become the Angkor region. He established capitals at various locations, each move representing either strategic necessity or symbolic significance. The mobility of his court during these early years suggests a ruler who understood that physical presence was essential to maintaining authority over newly conquered territories. One of the most intriguing aspects of Jayavarman's reign is his relationship with the ancient sacred places of the Khmer lands. Rather than destroying or ignoring pre-existing religious sites, he incorporated them into his new religious system. Ancient temples were renovated and rededicated, their local deities identified with Hindu gods, or incorporated as subordinate deities in the expanding pantheon. This syncretic approach helped to legitimize his rule among populations who might otherwise have resisted foreign religious impositions. The economy under Jayavarman's emerging empire showed signs of recovery and growth after the disruptions of the previous century. Agricultural production increased as irrigation systems were repaired and extended. Trade routes that had been disrupted by warfare were reopened and protected. Inscriptions from this period mention various occupational groups, from farmers and fishermen to artisans and merchants, suggesting a complex economy with considerable specialization. The military forces that Jayavarman commanded were probably not dramatically different in composition from those of earlier periods, but they appear to have been more effectively organized. The king's ability to conduct sustained campaigns over many years suggests a reliable system of recruitment and supply. Elite cavalry units, mounted on horses imported from the mainland Southeast Asian highlands, provided mobile striking power. War elephants, decorated with gold and precious stones, served both as weapons platforms and symbols of royal power. The role of women in Jayavarman's emerging empire deserves special attention. Queens and princesses appear frequently in inscriptions, not merely as wives and mothers, but as active participants in religious and political life. They founded temples, sponsored religious ceremonies, and in some cases appear to have governed territories in their own right. The Queen Jayandradevi, mentioned in several inscriptions, seems to have been particularly influential, possibly serving as co-ruler or regent during portions of Jayavarman's reign. Architecture from Jayavarman's period, while modest compared to later Angkorian monuments, shows important developments in Khmer building techniques. The temples constructed during his reign exhibit improved stone-cutting techniques and more sophisticated structural engineering. The characteristic Khmer temple mountain, representing Mount Meru, the cosmic mountain at the centre of the Hindu-Buddhist universe, begins to take its classical form. These structures were not just places of worship, but representations in stone of the cosmic order that the king maintained through his divine connection. The administrative system that Jayavarman established laid the groundwork for the bureaucratic apparatus that would govern the Khmer Empire for centuries. Officials with Sanskrit titles managed various aspects of government, from tax collection to judicial proceedings. The inscription from Stok Kak Tom, though written much later, preserves information about the hereditary positions established during Jayavarman's reign, including the crucial role of the Purohita, the chief priest who maintained the Devaraya cult. Education and literacy, while limited to the elite, received royal patronage. Young men from noble families were trained in Sanskrit and Khmer writing, in religious texts and ritual procedures, in law and administration. This educated class formed the backbone of both religious and secular administration, ensuring continuity of government even through periods of political instability. The emphasis on Sanskrit learning also maintained cultural connections with India, allowing for continued importation and adaptation of religious and philosophical ideas. The transformation of the Khmer lands under Jayavarman II extended beyond politics and religion to include fundamental changes in how people understood their place in the world. The concept of a unified empire, rather than a collection of autonomous principalities, began to take hold. The idea that the king's religious activities directly affected the welfare of all his subjects created a sense of shared destiny. The magnificent temples and elaborate rituals demonstrated the power and glory of the emerging state, inspiring both awe and loyalty among the population. As Jayavarman's reign progressed, he made a decision that would have profound consequences for Khmer history. He established his final capital in the Angkor region, specifically at Mount Mahendraparvata, known today as Phnom Kulen. This location was chosen for both strategic and symbolic reasons. Strategically, it was centrally located within his territories, with good access to water resources and agricultural lands. Symbolically, the mountain represented the Axis Mundi, the cosmic centre where heaven and earth meet. The ceremony conducted at Mahendraparvata in the year 802, according to traditional dating, marked the formal beginning of the Khmer Empire. This was when Jayavarman performed the ritual that established the Devaraja cult and declared Cambodia's independence from Java. The ceremony, conducted by the Brahmin Hiranyadharma, involved complex rituals that probably lasted several days. Sacred texts were recited, offerings were made to the gods, and the sacred linga that embodied the Devaraja was consecrated. The declaration of independence from Java has puzzled historians, as it's unclear whether Java exercised any real control over the Khmer lands at this time. Some scholars suggest this was more a symbolic declaration, a rejection of any claims to suzerainty that Javanese rulers might make based on past relationships. Others see it as a spiritual independence, a declaration that the Khmer king derived his authority directly from Shiva rather than through any earthly intermediary. The establishment of the Devaraja cult created a unique form of sacred kingship that would distinguish the Khmer Empire from its neighbours. Unlike the Chinese concept of the mandate of heaven, which could be withdrawn from an unworthy ruler, the Devaraja cult posited an unbreakable connection between the king and divine power. This didn't mean the king couldn't be overthrown, but it did mean that any successful usurper would need to establish their own divine connection, usually by claiming descent from or spiritual succession to previous rulers. The religious architecture that Jayavarman sponsored reflected this new conception of kingship. Temple mountains were not just places to worship the gods, but were embodiments of the cosmic mountain, with the king's divine essence residing at the summit. The orientation of these structures, their proportions, and their decorative programs all followed precise symbolic requirements. Every element, from the number of towers to the subjects depicted in bas-reliefs, carried meaning within the complex cosmological system. The impact of Jayavarman's innovations extended to the daily lives of ordinary Khmer people. The agricultural calendar became linked to royal rituals, with planting and harvesting times determined by court astronomers. Local festivals were incorporated into the imperial religious calendar, creating a unified cycle of celebrations that reinforced imperial identity. The king's public appearances, whether for religious ceremonies or royal processions, became occasions for the entire population to participate in the sacred drama of divine kingship. The legal system under Jayavarman began to show the influence of Indian law codes, particularly the Dharmashastra texts, but adapted to Khmer customs and conditions. Royal edicts carried the force of divine command, but local customs continued to govern many aspects of daily life. The king served as the ultimate judge in important cases, with the power to overturn lower court decisions. This judicial role reinforced the king's position as the maintainer of Dharma, the cosmic order that ensured justice and prosperity. Trade and commerce flourished under the stability provided by Jayavarman's rule. Markets were established in major towns, with royal officials ensuring fair weights and measures. Long-distance trade brought exotic goods from China, India, and the Indonesian archipelago. The empire exported forest products, precious stones, and later agricultural surpluses. This economic prosperity provided the resources necessary for the ambitious building projects that would characterize the Angkorian period. The artistic developments during Jayavarman's reign, while less spectacular than what would come later, established important precedents. Sculptors began to develop the distinctive Khmer style that balanced Indian influences with local aesthetics. The treatment of the human figure became more naturalistic, while maintaining the idealized proportions prescribed by religious texts. Decorative motifs drawn from local flora and fauna began to appear alongside traditional Indian designs. The question of succession, always crucial in monarchical systems, was addressed through a combination of hereditary principle and divine selection. While sons of kings had strong claims to the throne, the ultimate legitimacy came from successfully performing the rituals that established connection with the Deva Raja. This system led to succession disputes, as multiple claimants might assert their divine mandate, but it also provided flexibility that allowed capable leaders to rise to power even without direct royal descent. Jayavarman II's death, traditionally dated to 850, though some scholars argue for earlier or later dates, marked the end of an era of transformation. In roughly half a century, he had transformed a fragmented, vulnerable region into a unified empire with a distinctive ideology and robust institutions. The foundations he laid, particularly the Devaraja cult and the concept of divine kingship, would endure for 6 centuries, providing the ideological framework within which successive rulers would build one of the world's most remarkable civilizations. The immediate succession after Jayavarman II appears to have been smooth, with his son Jayavarman III taking the throne. This peaceful transition suggests that the institutions and ideological framework established by the founder had taken root. The new king inherited not just territory and armies, but a system of governance and a concept of royal authority that transcended individual personality. The empire was no longer dependent on the charisma or military prowess of a single leader, but had developed institutional structures that could survive and even thrive under different rulers. The death of Jayavarman II did not bring chaos or fragmentation, as might have been expected after the passing of such a transformative leader. Instead, his son, Jayavarman III, assumed the throne with apparent ease, inheriting a kingdom that had been fundamentally restructured and unified under a powerful new ideology. This smooth transition marked the beginning of a period of consolidation and expansion that would see successive rulers build upon the foundations laid by the empire's founder, each adding their own contributions to the growing magnificence of Khmer civilization. Jayavarman III's reign, lasting from approximately 850 to 807, is less well documented than his father's, which has led some historians to characterize it as a period of quiet consolidation. Yet this relative silence in the historical record should not be mistaken for inactivity. The very stability of his long reign suggests effective governance and the successful maintenance of the complex religious and political systems his father had established. Inscriptions from this period, though fewer in number, indicate continued temple construction and the maintenance of the Deva Raja cult that legitimized royal authority. The temples built during Jayavarman III's reign, including Premonti and Trapeang Phong, show evolutionary development in Khmer architectural techniques. While not as grand as later monuments, these structures demonstrate improving mastery of sandstone construction and increasingly sophisticated decorative programs. The carved lintels from this period display remarkable artistic skill, with intricate depictions of Hindu deities and mythological scenes that would become hallmarks of Khmer art. Perhaps most significantly, Jayavarman III's reign saw the continued development of the administrative apparatus necessary to govern a large empire. The inscription from Pursat Compass mentions various official titles and administrative positions, suggesting a bureaucracy that was becoming more specialised and sophisticated. Tax collection systems were refined, with portions of revenue designated for temple maintenance, military expenses, and public works. This fiscal organisation would prove crucial for the ambitious building projects of later reigns. The succession crisis that followed Jayavarman III's death revealed both the strengths and vulnerabilities of the Khmer political system. The throne was seized not by his son, but by Indravarman III, who claimed legitimacy through both descent from previous rulers and his marriage to a princess of the royal line. This pattern of succession, through a combination of hereditary right, marriage alliance, and demonstrated capability, would recur throughout Khmer history, providing flexibility but also creating opportunities for conflict. Indravarman I, who ruled from 877 to 889, proved to be one of the most significant early Khmer monarchs, initiating projects and policies that would define the empire for centuries to come. His reign marked a crucial transition from the foundational period to an era of monumental construction and territorial expansion. Unlike his predecessors, who had focused primarily on political unification, Indravarman embarked on a comprehensive program of religious, agricultural, and architectural development. The king's first major innovation was the construction of the Indratataka Barai, an enormous artificial reservoir measuring approximately 3.8 kilometres by 750 metres. This massive undertaking required the mobilisation of thousands of workers and sophisticated engineering knowledge. The Barai was not merely a practical water storage facility, but carried profound religious significance, representing the cosmic ocean that surrounded Mount Meru in Hindu-Buddhist cosmology. Its construction demonstrated the king's ability to harness the labour and resources of his realm for projects that benefited both the spiritual and material welfare of his subjects. The Indratataka Barai served multiple purposes that illustrate the integrated nature of Khmer civilization. Practically, it provided water for irrigation during the dry season, enabling more intensive agriculture and supporting a larger population. Religiously, it served as a site for ritual purification and ceremonies. Politically, its construction demonstrated royal power and beneficence. The successful completion of such a massive project early in his reign established Indravarman's credentials as a worthy successor to the empire's founder. Alongside the Barai, Indravarman constructed the temple complex of Preah Ko, dedicated in 829 to his ancestors and the previous kings of the empire. This temple, with its 6 towers arranged in 2 rows, established architectural patterns that would be repeated and elaborated in later constructions. The dedication to ancestral spirits alongside Hindu deities demonstrates the syncretic nature of Khmer religion, where indigenous ancestor worship was seamlessly integrated with imported Indian religious concepts. The inscriptions from Preah Ko provide valuable insights into the ideology of Khmer kingship during this period. They describe Indravarman as a Chakravartin, a universal ruler whose authority extended to the very boundaries of the world. This concept borrowed from Indian political philosophy but adapted to Khmer circumstances, justified the empire's expansion and the king's claim to supreme authority. The inscriptions also detail the king's genealogy, tracing his descent through both maternal and paternal lines to establish multiple sources of legitimacy. Indravarman's most ambitious project was the Temple Mountain of Barkong, the first great pyramid temple of the Angkorian period. Rising in 5 terraces to a height of 15 metres, Barkong represented a significant advance in Khmer architectural ambition and engineering capability. The temple's design, with its central tower surrounded by smaller shrines and enclosed by concentric walls, established the template for the classic Khmer Temple Mountain that would reach its apex in Angkor Wat. The construction of Barkong required not just engineering skill, but also sophisticated organisational capability. Thousands of workers had to be fed, housed, and coordinated. Sandstone blocks had to be quarried, transported, and precisely fitted. Sculptors and decorative artists needed to work according to a unified plan. The successful completion of this project demonstrated that the Khmer Empire had developed the administrative and logistical capabilities necessary for even grander undertakings. The religious life of the empire during Indravarman's reign shows increasing complexity and sophistication. While Shaivism remained the dominant royal cult, other forms of Hinduism and various schools of Buddhism coexisted and sometimes competed for royal patronage. The king himself, while primarily devoted to Shaiva, also made donations to Buddhist monasteries and Vaishnava temples. This religious pluralism, far from weakening royal authority, actually strengthened it by allowing the king to present himself as the protector and patron of all religious communities. The economic foundations of Indravarman's ambitious building program deserve careful consideration. The empire's wealth came primarily from agricultural surplus, made possible by the intensive cultivation of rice in the fertile lands around Tonle Sap. The Barre system increased agricultural productivity by providing reliable irrigation, allowing for multiple harvests per year. Trade also contributed to royal revenues, with the empire controlling important trade routes between the coast and the interior highlands. The social structure of the empire during this period was becoming increasingly stratified and specialised. At the apex stood the royal family and high nobility, who controlled vast estates and commanded military forces. Below them were various grades of officials, priests and military officers. Artisans and skilled workers formed a crucial middle stratum, their expertise essential for the empire's architectural and artistic achievements. The vast majority of the population consisted of farmers who provided the agricultural surplus that supported all other activities. The role of slavery in Khmer society during Indravarman's reign was complex and multifaceted. Slaves, acquired through war, debt, or judicial punishment, performed various functions from agricultural labour to specialised crafts. Temple slaves, donated by the king or nobles, maintained religious sites and participated in ceremonies. While their status was clearly subordinate, some slaves could accumulate property and even purchase their freedom. The institution of slavery, while exploitative, was integrated into the religious merit-making system, with the donation of slaves to temples considered a pious act. Indravarman's military campaigns, while less extensively documented than his building projects, appear to have extended Khmer control over neighbouring territories. Inscriptions mention victories over unnamed enemies and the incorporation of new territories into the empire. The military organisation of this period included permanent royal guards, provincial levies called up for specific campaigns, and specialised units, such as Elephant Corps, and naval forces for riverine operations. The death of Indravarman II in 889 brought his son Jayavarman II to the throne, initiating one of the most creative and expansive reigns in early Angkorian history. Yasovarman, whose name means protected by glory, would live up to his appellation through a reign marked by territorial expansion, religious innovation, and most significantly, the establishment of the first city at Angkor, the site that would remain the heart of the Khmer Empire for centuries. Yasovarman began his reign with a symbolic act that demonstrated both continuity with the past and his own innovative vision. He completed the religious dedications at his father's temples while simultaneously embarking on his own building program that would dwarf previous efforts. His first major construction was the Lole Temple, built on an artificial island in the middle of his father's Indratataka Barai. This placement was deeply symbolic, representing the cosmic mountain emerging from the primordial waters, with the king as the divine agent bringing order from chaos. The inscriptions from Lole, dated to 893, provide remarkable detail about Yasovarman's conception of kingship and his plans for the empire. Written in both Sanskrit and Khmer, they describe not just religious dedications but also practical matters such as the allocation of resources for temple maintenance, the duties of various officials, and regulations governing the behaviour of temple servants. This combination of spiritual and administrative content reflects the integrated nature of Khmer governance, where religious and secular authority were inseparable. Yasovarman's most momentous decision was to establish a new capital at Angkor, centred around the hill known as Phnom Bakheng. This move, occurring around 889-900, would have consequences that resonated through centuries of Khmer history. The site was chosen with careful consideration of both practical and cosmological factors. Located on the northern shore of Tonle Sap, it had access to abundant water and fertile agricultural lands. The presence of Phnom Bakheng provided a natural elevation that could serve as the location for the state temple, physically and symbolically elevating it above the surrounding landscape. The construction of Yasodharapura, as the new capital was called, represented urban planning on an unprecedented scale. The city was laid out according to cosmic principles, with the temple mountain of Bakheng at its centre, representing Mount Meru. Surrounding the central temple were concentric rectangles of walls and moats, creating a mandala pattern that replicated the structure of the universe as understood in Hindu-Buddhist cosmology. The entire city became a microcosm, an earthly reflection of divine order. The Bakheng temple itself was an architectural marvel that demonstrated significant advances in Khmer engineering and symbolic design. The temple featured 108 towers, arranged on 5 terraces, with the number 108 carrying profound significance in Hindu and Buddhist thought. The arrangement of towers was precisely calculated so that only 33 were visible from any cardinal direction, representing the 33 gods who dwelt on Mount Meru. This mathematical precision in service of religious symbolism would become a characteristic feature of Khmer architecture. Perhaps Yasovarman's most ambitious undertaking was the construction of the East Barai, or Yasodharatataka, a reservoir of staggering proportions measuring 7 kilometres by 1.8 kilometres. This massive body of water, larger than any previous Barai, required the movement of millions of cubic metres of earth and the construction of enormous embankments. The engineering challenges were formidable, requiring precise surveying to ensure proper water retention and distribution. The successful completion of this project demonstrated that Khmer hydraulic engineering had reached a level of sophistication comparable to any contemporary civilization. The East Barai was more than just an irrigation reservoir. It was a statement of royal power and divine favour. The ability to control water on such a scale placed the king in the role of provider and protector, ensuring agricultural prosperity for his subjects. The barre also served religious functions, with ritual boats carrying images of deities across its waters during festivals. An island temple, the East Mebon, would later be constructed in its centre, creating another representation of the cosmic mountain rising from the primordial ocean. Yasovarman's religious policy showed remarkable inclusiveness and innovation. While maintaining the traditional Shaivite orientation of Khmer kingship, he also patronized Buddhism on an unprecedented scale. He constructed over 100 ashrams across his empire, providing support for various religious communities including Shaivites, Vaishnavites, and Buddhists. Each ashram was endowed with rice fields, servants, and resources for maintaining scholars and conducting rituals. This policy of religious pluralism strengthened royal authority by making the king the supreme patron of all religious traditions. The inscriptions from these ashrams, particularly the famous Stok Kak Tom inscription, though written later, provide invaluable information about the intellectual and religious life of the period. They describe libraries containing Sanskrit texts on philosophy, medicine, astronomy, and law. Scholars at these institutions engaged in copying manuscripts, translating texts, and composing original works. The ashrams served as centres of learning that preserved and transmitted knowledge across generations. The administrative reforms implemented during Yasovarman's reign further strengthened imperial governance. The empire was divided into provinces, each governed by officials appointed by the king. These governors were responsible for tax collection, maintenance of public works, and administration of justice. Below them were district and village officials who handled local affairs. This hierarchical system allowed for effective governance of territories that now extended from the Mekong Delta to the Korat Plateau. The legal system under Yasovarman shows evidence of increasing sophistication and standardization. Royal edicts established uniform punishments for various crimes, though local customs continued to influence judicial proceedings. The king served as the supreme judge, with the power to review and overturn lower court decisions. Legal proceedings were recorded in writing, with copies kept in royal archives. This documentation provides modern historians with insights into daily life, social relations, and economic activities of the period. Economic development during Yasovarman's reign was closely tied to agricultural intensification made possible by improved irrigation. The East Barre and associated canal systems allowed for year-round cultivation in areas previously dependent on seasonal rainfall. Rice yields increased, supporting a growing population and freeing labour for construction projects and craft production. Market towns grew up around temple complexes, with merchants trading local products for goods from distant lands. The material culture of Yasovarman's period shows increasing refinement and luxury among the elite. Archaeological excavations have uncovered elaborate jewellery, fine ceramics, and bronze artefacts that demonstrate sophisticated metalworking techniques. The houses of nobles, while built primarily of perishable materials, were decorated with carved wooden panels and furnished with imported goods. Even common people had access to a variety of goods through market exchanges, including pottery, textiles, and metal tools. Military organisation under Yasovarman became more systematic and professional. Standing armies were maintained at the capital and major provincial centres, ready to respond to threats or conduct offensive campaigns. Military service was required of adult males, though the wealthy could provide substitutes or pay exemption fees. The army included specialised units, elephant cavalry for shock attacks, horse cavalry for rapid movement, infantry armed with spears and swords, and archers providing ranged support. Naval forces operated on rivers and the Great Lake, using vessels ranging from small patrol boats to large transport ships. Yasovarman's foreign policy combined military expansion with diplomatic engagement. Campaigns extended Khmer control into what is now central Thailand and southern Laos. But the king also maintained diplomatic relations with neighbouring powers, exchanging embassies with Champa and maintaining trade relations with China and Java. These international connections brought new ideas and technologies to the empire, while also providing markets for Khmer products. The cultural achievements of Yasovarman's reign extended beyond architecture to include literature and performing arts. The king himself was credited with composing Sanskrit poetry, though these attributions may have been honorary. Court performances included classical Indian dramas adapted to Khmer tastes, as well as indigenous dance and musical traditions. The famous Cambodian classical dance, with its elaborate costumes and stylized movements, has its roots in the court performances of this period. Education during Yasovarman's reign was primarily religious in nature, but included practical subjects necessary for administration and commerce. Young nobles studied Sanskrit and Khmer writing, religious texts, and basic mathematics. Specialized education was available for future priests who learned complex rituals and astronomical calculations. Artisans underwent lengthy apprenticeships to master techniques of sculpture, architecture, and decorative arts. This educational system ensured the transmission of knowledge and skills necessary for the empire's continued development. The position of women in Yasovarman's empire shows interesting complexities. While formally subordinate to male authority, women could exercise considerable power and influence. Queens and princesses controlled vast estates and sponsored religious foundations. Women served as priestesses and ritual specialists in certain cults. In economic life, women dominated local market trade and participated in craft production. Inscriptions mention women doctors, suggesting that some women received specialized education. Marriage alliances were crucial political tools, with royal women serving as links between powerful families. The environmental impact of Yasovarman's massive construction projects was significant but carefully managed. The creation of barrays and canal systems altered local hydrology, but in ways that generally enhanced rather than degraded the environment. The reservoirs moderated flooding, recharged groundwater, and created habitats for fish and other aquatic resources. Forest clearance for agriculture was extensive but selective, with sacred groves and economically valuable trees preserved. The Khmer demonstrated an understanding of sustainable resource management that would serve them well for centuries. As Yasovarman's reign drew to a close around 910, he had transformed the Khmer Empire in fundamental ways. The establishment of Angkor as the capital created a sacred centre that would endure for 6 centuries. The massive hydraulic works provided the agricultural foundation for a population that would eventually number in the millions. The inclusive religious policy created a framework for cultural synthesis and innovation. The administrative and military reforms established institutions capable of governing a vast and diverse empire. The succession after Yasovarman's death initially proceeded smoothly, with his son Harshavarman Khoro taking the throne. However, this reign would be relatively brief and troubled, marking the beginning of a period of instability that would test the institutions and ideologies established by the early kings. Harshavarman faced challenges from his brothers and regional lords who sensed weakness in the central authority. His reign, lasting from approximately 910 to 923, saw little new construction and possible territorial losses on the empire's peripheries. The architectural legacy of Harshavarman III is limited but significant in what it reveals about royal priorities during troubled times. The king completed some of his father's unfinished projects and maintained existing temples, but initiated few new constructions. The Bakse Chamkrong Temple, though small, shows continued refinement in architectural techniques. Its pyramid structure, while modest in scale, demonstrates perfect proportions and sophisticated decorative elements. The inscriptions from this period emphasize legitimacy and continuity rather than innovation, suggesting a ruler concerned primarily with maintaining rather than expanding his inheritance. The death of Harshavarman brought his brother Isanavarman II to power, but this reign was even briefer and more troubled. Lasting perhaps only from 923 to 928, Isanavarman II's rule was marked by internal conflicts that would culminate in a usurpation that brought a new dynasty to power. The weakness of these two reigns demonstrates that the Khmer Empire, despite its impressive achievements, remained vulnerable to succession disputes and regional rebellions that could threaten the entire structure of imperial authority. The period of the early kings from Jayavarman III through Isanavarman II had seen the transformation of the Khmer Empire from a newly unified kingdom into a major regional power, with sophisticated institutions, monumental architecture, and complex religious and cultural life. The foundations laid during these reigns, particularly the innovations of Indravarman II and Yasovarman II, would prove remarkably durable. The hydraulic systems they constructed would continue functioning for centuries. The architectural principles they established would be elaborated and perfected by their successors. The administrative and religious frameworks they created would provide stability even through periods of political turbulence. The political turmoil that marked the end of Isanavarman II's reign in 928 brought to power a remarkable figure who would inaugurate a new phase in the Khmer Empire's development. Jayavarman IV, who seized the throne through a combination of military force and political manoeuvring, chose not to rule from Angkor, but instead established his capital at Khmer, some 90 kilometers to the northeast. This dramatic departure from tradition might have spelled fragmentation for a less resilient state, but instead it demonstrated the empire's capacity for adaptation and renewal. Khmer, during its brief period as the capital from 928 to 944, witnessed an explosion of architectural creativity that pushed Khmer engineering to new limits. The site's centerpiece, the Pyramid Temple of Prasat Tom, soared to a height of 36 meters, making it the tallest Khmer structure of its time. This seven-tiered pyramid, unlike the stepped pyramids of Angkor, rose at a steep angle that created a dramatically different visual effect. The technical challenges of constructing such a monument away from the established infrastructure of Angkor demonstrated remarkable organizational capability and architectural ambition. The artistic output of the Khmer period shows distinctive characteristics that set it apart from earlier Angkorian art. Sculptures became more dynamic and expressive, with figures captured in dramatic poses that conveyed movement and emotion. The colossal statue of Garuda, Vishnu's mount, discovered at Khmer stands nearly 2 meters tall and displays a powerful sense of motion frozen in stone. The famous dancing Shiva sculptures from this period show the god in various poses of the cosmic dance, with multiple arms gracefully arranged to suggest perpetual movement. Jayavarman IV's decision to rule from Khmer rather than Angkor has puzzled historians, but recent archaeological evidence suggests multiple motivations. The region around Khmer was rich in iron ore, providing resources for weapons and tools. The site also controlled important trade routes to the Dangrek Mountains and beyond. Perhaps most significantly, establishing a new capital allowed Jayavarman IV to create a power base independent of the established noble families of Angkor, who might have resisted his usurpation. The religious life of the empire during the Khmer period maintained continuity with earlier traditions while introducing new elements. The state temple at Prasat Tom housed a linga of unprecedented size, nearly 5 meters tall and weighing several tons. This massive symbol of Shiva's creative power required special architectural accommodations with reinforced foundations and a specially designed chamber. The scale of this linga suggests an attempt to surpass all previous royal religious monuments, establishing Jayavarman IV's supremacy through sheer magnitude. Despite ruling from Khmer, Jayavarman IV maintained control over the traditional territories of the empire, including Angkor. Inscriptions from this period, found throughout the empire, indicate that the administrative system continued to function, with taxes collected and justice administered in the king's name. The ability to maintain imperial cohesion while ruling from a peripheral location demonstrates the strength of the institutions established by earlier rulers and the effectiveness of the imperial ideology that transcended specific locations. The death of Jayavarman IV in 941 and the brief reign of his son, Harshavarman II, until 944, marked the end of the Khmer experiment. The throne was then claimed by Rajendravarman II, who made the crucial decision to return the capital to Angkor. This restoration was more than a simple relocation. It represented a conscious effort to reconnect with the sacred geography and institutional traditions of the empire's heartland. Rajendravarman's reign, from 944 to 968, would prove to be one of consolidation and cultural flowering that prepared the ground for even greater achievements. Rajendravarman II's restoration of Angkor as the capital required significant effort to repair and revitalise infrastructure that had been neglected during the Khmer period. The East Barai, that massive reservoir constructed by Yasovarman V, was renovated and improved. New temples were constructed, including the East Mabon, built on an artificial island in the centre of the East Barai. This temple, with its 5 towers arranged in a quincunx pattern, established architectural principles that would be elaborated in later monuments. The Prayrup Temple, Rajendravarman's state temple, completed in 961, represents a significant evolution in Khmer architectural design. The temple's name, meaning turning the body, refers to traditional cremation rituals, suggesting its use for royal funeral ceremonies. The structure rises in 3 tiers to a height of 12 metres, with 5 lotus-shaped towers crowning the summit. The sophisticated use of laterite and sandstone, with each material employed according to its structural properties, demonstrates advancing engineering knowledge. Perhaps Rajendravarman's most lasting contribution was his patronage of learning and literature. The king surrounded himself with scholars and poets, creating a court culture that valued intellectual achievement alongside military prowess. The famous poet and scholar Kavindharamathana served as the king's guru and chief minister, composing Sanskrit verses that are still admired for their elegance and complexity. This emphasis on cultural refinement would characterize the Angkorian court for generations to come. The administrative reforms implemented during Rajendravarman's reign strengthened imperial governance while allowing for regional variation. The empire was divided into provinces called Vishaya, each governed by officials who reported directly to the king. These governors were responsible for maintaining order, collecting taxes, and mobilizing resources for royal projects. Below them, a hierarchy of officials extended down to the village level, creating a comprehensive administrative network that could effectively govern diverse populations across vast territories. The economic prosperity of Rajendravarman's reign is evident in the extensive construction projects and the luxury goods found in archaeological sites from this period. Trade networks extended from China to India, with Khmer merchants serving as intermediaries in the exchange of goods across Southeast Asia. Chinese ceramics, Indian textiles, and Javanese metalwork have been found in Angkorian sites from this period, while Khmer products, particularly forest goods and precious stones, were exported to distant markets. The succession of Jayavarman V in 968 at the age of only 10 years old might have precipitated a crisis, but the institutions of the empire proved robust enough to manage a lengthy regency. The young king's guru, Yajnavarha, effectively governed the empire during the king's minority, maintaining stability and continuing the cultural and architectural programs of previous reigns. This peaceful regency demonstrates the maturity of Khmer political institutions and the acceptance of established succession principles. Jayavarman V's long reign, extending from 968 to 1001, was marked more by cultural achievement than military conquest. The king was known as a patron of learning, establishing centres of education and supporting scholars from various philosophical traditions. The period saw a flowering of Sanskrit literature, with complex philosophical texts being composed alongside poetry and drama. The tolerance and even encouragement of philosophical debate created an intellectual atmosphere that attracted scholars from across Southeast and South Asia. The Banteay Srey Temple, though not a royal commission but built by courtiers, represents the artistic pinnacle of Jayavarman V's reign. Constructed of pink sandstone that allowed for extraordinarily fine carving, the temple features some of the most intricate and beautiful decorative work in all of Khmer art. The narrative reliefs depicting scenes from Hindu epics show remarkable attention to detail, with individual figures displaying distinct expressions and gestures. The quality of carving at Banteay Srey set new standards that influenced Khmer sculptural traditions for centuries. The political stability of Jayavarman V's reign ended with his death in 1001, precipitating a decade of civil war that would test the resilience of Khmer institutions. Multiple claimants to the throne emerged, each commanding regional power bases and military forces. The conflict devastated parts of the empire, disrupting trade and agricultural production. Yet even during this period of strife, construction and artistic production continued in areas under stable control, suggesting that local institutions could function even when central authority was contested. The eventual victor in these succession struggles was Suryavarman II, who claimed the throne in 1010 after years of military campaigns. His name, meaning protected by the sun, marked a shift from the traditional Shaivite orientation of Khmer kingship toward a more inclusive religious policy. Suryavarman's reign, lasting until 1050, would prove transformative, expanding the empire to its greatest territorial extent, while implementing administrative reforms that strengthened imperial control. Suryavarman I's rise to power was unconventional, as he appears to have come from a relatively minor noble family rather than the direct royal line. His success depended on military skill, political acumen, and the ability to build coalitions among various noble factions. The inscriptions from his reign emphasize his Buddhist faith alongside traditional Hindu practices, suggesting a conscious effort to appeal to diverse religious communities within the empire. The territorial expansion under Suryavarman I was remarkable in both scale and duration. Campaigns extended Khmer control westward into the Chao Phraya Basin of present-day Thailand, northward into southern Laos, and southward into the Malay Peninsula. These conquests were not mere raids, but systematic incorporation of new territories into the imperial administration. Local rulers who submitted were often retained as vassals, governing their traditional territories but owing allegiance and tribute to the Khmer emperor. The administrative innovations of Suryavarman's reign created more effective mechanisms for governing this expanded empire. The king required all officials to swear a personal oath of loyalty recorded in the famous inscription at the royal palace. This oath, which invoked terrible curses on those who proved disloyal, created a personal bond between the king and his administrators that transcended traditional bureaucratic relationships. The practice of requiring written oaths would continue throughout the Angkorian period. The economic policies of Suryavarman I promoted trade and agricultural development across the empire. Royal edicts standardized weights and measures, facilitating commercial exchange. The construction of roads and rest houses improved communication and transportation. Markets were established at regular intervals along major routes, protected by royal guards from bandits. These infrastructure investments paid dividends in increased tax revenues and economic growth that funded further expansion and construction projects. The religious architecture of Suryavarman II's reign shows increasing sophistication in both design and execution. The Phaimeyanaka's temple, built within the royal palace compound, featured innovative architectural elements, including covered galleries and sophisticated drainage systems. The temple's modest size belied its importance as the site of royal rituals, including the legendary nightly union between the king and the Naga princess, who was believed to embody the prosperity of the kingdom. The Western Barai, begun during Suryavarman Urut's reign, though not completed until later, represented hydraulic engineering on an unprecedented scale. Measuring 8 kilometers by 2.2 kilometers, it was the largest reservoir ever constructed by the Khmer. The technical challenges of creating such a massive body of water on relatively flat terrain required sophisticated understanding of hydrology and soil mechanics. The successful completion of this project demonstrated that Khmer engineering had reached a level comparable to any contemporary civilization. Military organization under Suryavarman became more professional and sophisticated. The army was divided into specialized units with specific training and equipment. Elephant cavalry remained the prestige force, with war elephants protected by leather armor and carrying platforms for archers. Horse cavalry provided mobility for rapid strikes and reconnaissance. Infantry units were organized by weapon type: spearmen for close combat, archers for ranged attack, and specialized units equipped with crossbows, a technology possibly borrowed from China. The naval forces of Suryavarman deserve special attention, as they were crucial for controlling the rivers and coastal areas of the expanded empire. Khmer naval technology included various vessel types, from small patrol boats to large transport ships capable of carrying troops and supplies over long distances. Naval battles on the Great Lake and Mekong River determined control of strategic waterways. The ability to project power through naval forces allowed the Khmer to dominate maritime trade routes and suppress piracy. The cultural life of the court during Suryavarman's reign combined traditional Khmer elements with influences from the newly conquered territories. Musicians and dancers from various regions performed at court, creating a cosmopolitan cultural atmosphere. The king's patronage extended to artists and craftsmen from different traditions, resulting in creative synthesis and innovation. This cultural inclusiveness helped to integrate diverse populations into the imperial system. The succession after Suryavarman's death in 1050 brought Jayavarman II to the throne, continuing the expansionist and building policies of his predecessor. Jayavarman's reign from 1050 to 1066 saw the completion of the Western Barai and the construction of the Bafuan, one of the most ambitious temple mountains ever attempted by the Khmer. The Bafuan, dedicated to Shiva, was designed as a massive three-tiered pyramid rising to a height of 50 meters, making it the tallest structure at Angkor until the construction of Angkor Wat. The engineering challenges of the Baphuon pushed Khmer architectural technology to its limits, and perhaps beyond. The massive weight of the structure, combined with inadequate foundations, caused structural problems even during construction. Efforts to stabilize the temple required innovative engineering solutions, including the use of iron cramps to hold stones together and sophisticated drainage systems to prevent water damage. Despite these challenges, or perhaps because of them, the Baphuon represented a crucial learning experience that informed later architectural achievements. Jayavarman II's reign also saw significant religious developments, particularly the growing influence of Buddhism alongside traditional Hinduism. The king, while maintaining the official Shaivite state cult, also patronized Buddhist institutions and sponsored the construction of Buddhist monuments. This religious pluralism reflected the diverse beliefs of the empire's population and helped to maintain social harmony across different communities. The death of Jayavarman II in 1066 precipitated another succession crisis, with his brother Harshavarman III eventually securing the throne. This reign, lasting until approximately 1080, was marked by internal rebellions and external pressures that revealed vulnerabilities in the imperial system. Regional lords, empowered by distance from the capital and control of local resources, began to assert greater independence. The Kingdom of Champa, long a rival of the Khmer, launched raids into imperial territory. Despite these challenges, Harshavarman III maintained control of the core territories and even initiated new construction projects. The inscriptions from his reign show continued functioning of the administrative system, with taxes collected and justice administered according to established procedures. The resilience of Khmer institutions, even during periods of political weakness, demonstrates the deep roots that imperial structures had developed over 2 centuries of development. The end of Harshavarman III's reign brought another period of civil conflict, with various claimants fighting for control of the throne. This instability would continue until the emergence of Jayavarman II in 1113, whose reign would mark the absolute pinnacle of Khmer architectural achievement and military power. The foundation for Jayavarman II's achievements had been laid by generations of rulers who had developed the administrative, economic, and technological capabilities necessary for such ambitious undertakings. Jayavarman II ascended to the throne through military victory, defeating his rival Nripatindravarman in single combat on war elephants, according to inscriptions. This dramatic beginning to his reign set the tone for a period of aggressive expansion and monumental construction that would define the classical period of Khmer civilization. His reign, extending from 1113 to approximately 1150, would see the creation of Angkor Wat, the largest religious monument ever constructed and the supreme achievement of Khmer architecture. The decision to build Angkor Wat represented more than royal vanity or religious devotion. It was a statement of imperial power and divine mandate that would echo through centuries. The temple's dedication to Vishnu rather than Shiva, who had been the traditional focus of state temples, marked a significant religious shift. This change possibly reflected Jayavarman II's personal devotion, but also represented a sophisticated understanding of religious symbolism and political legitimation. The scale of Angkor Wat defies easy comprehension. The outer enclosure measures 1,024 metres by 802 metres, surrounded by a moat 190 metres wide. The central temple complex rises through 3 levels to a height of 65 metres, with 5 towers arranged in a quincunx pattern representing the 5 peaks of Mount Meru. The amount of sandstone used in construction has been estimated at over 5 million tons, all of which had to be quarried, transported, and precisely fitted into place. The logistics of constructing Angkor Wat required unprecedented organisation and resources. Thousands of workers laboured for decades, requiring housing, food and tools. Skilled artisans carved elaborate bas-reliefs covering thousands of square metres of wall space. Engineers solved complex problems of weight distribution and water drainage. The successful completion of this monument demonstrated that the Khmer Empire had reached the peak of its organisational and technical capabilities. The artistic programme of Angkor Wat represents the culmination of centuries of Khmer cultural development. The bas-reliefs, extending for hundreds of metres along the galleries, depict scenes from Hindu epics, historical events, and cosmological themes. The famous churning of the ocean of milk panel shows gods and demons working together to extract the elixir of immortality, a metaphor for the creative tension that generates cosmic order. The precision and artistry of these carvings have never been surpassed in Southeast Asian art. Beyond Angkor Wat, Jayavarman II's reign saw extensive military campaigns that extended Khmer power to its greatest extent. Armies marched into the territory of the Mon kingdoms to the west, establishing Khmer suzerainty over much of present-day Thailand. Campaigns against Champa in the east resulted in the temporary occupation of the Cham capital. Naval expeditions may have reached as far as the Malay Peninsula and possibly even the islands of Indonesia. These conquests brought tribute and slaves to Angkor while spreading Khmer cultural influence across Southeast Asia. The administrative system under Jayavarman II shows evidence of increasing sophistication and centralization. Provincial governors were closely monitored by royal inspectors who reported directly to the king. A complex system of titles and ranks created a clear hierarchy of authority. Legal codes were standardized and enforced throughout the empire. This administrative efficiency allowed for effective governance of territories that now stretched over thousands of square kilometres. The death of Jayavarman II around 1150 marked not just the end of a reign, but the close of an era of confident expansion and monumental construction. The empire he left behind was vast, wealthy, and adorned with architectural marvels that proclaimed Khmer power to the world. Yet within this apparent strength lay seeds of vulnerability that would soon germinate into crisis. The succession disputes that followed Jayavarman II's death weakened central authority just as external enemies were gathering strength, setting the stage for one of the most dramatic periods in Khmer history. Yasovarman II's brief reign from 1150 to 1165 struggled to maintain the imperial momentum established by his predecessor. While the administrative apparatus continued to function and taxes were collected, the aggressive military campaigns that had characterized Jayavarman II's rule ceased. This period of relative military inactivity allowed the kingdom of Champa, long resentful of Khmer domination, to recover its strength and plan revenge. The Chams, a seafaring people with strong naval traditions, had suffered repeated defeats and humiliations at Khmer hands. But they had learned from these encounters, studying Khmer military tactics and identifying weaknesses in the empire's defences. The internal politics of Yasovarman II's court remain obscure, but inscriptions suggest factional conflicts between different noble families vying for influence. The king appears to have been murdered by one of his officials, Tribhuvanaditya Varman, who seized the throne in 1165. This usurpation created a crisis of legitimacy that weakened royal authority precisely when strong leadership was most needed. Tribhuvanaditya Varman's efforts to establish his rule through traditional means, including temple construction and religious ceremonies, failed to win universal acceptance among the nobility or the population. It was during this period of internal weakness that disaster struck. In 1177, a charm fleet sailed up the Mekong River and across the Tonle Sap, launching a surprise attack on Angkor itself. The audacity of this assault stunned the Khmer, who had grown accustomed to fighting wars on foreign soil rather than defending their heartland. The Cham forces, led by King Jayavarman IV, succeeded in capturing and sacking Angkor, killing Tribhuvanaditya Varman and throwing the empire into chaos. The sack of Angkor was more than a military defeat. It was a psychological catastrophe that shattered Khmer assumptions about their invincibility and divine protection. The great temples were looted, the royal palace burned, and the sacred lingam that embodied royal power was destroyed or carried away. For a civilization that understood political power in cosmic terms, where the king's relationship with the gods ensured prosperity and protection, this defeat raised fundamental questions about the nature of divine favour and royal legitimacy. Into this chaos stepped one of the most remarkable figures in Southeast Asian history, Prince Jayavarman, later to become Jayavarman VII. Born around 1125, he had spent much of his life away from the capital, possibly in Champa itself, where he may have been studying Buddhism or serving in some diplomatic capacity. His absence from Angkor during the succession disputes following Suryavarman II's death had kept him free from the factional conflicts that weakened the empire. Now, in the empire's darkest hour, he emerged as a military leader capable of organising resistance against the Cham occupation. The liberation of Angkor was not achieved in a single dramatic battle, but through a careful campaign of organisation and strategic warfare that lasted several years. Jayavarman gathered supporters from provinces that remained free from Cham control, building an army that combined traditional Khmer forces with new tactical innovations. He appears to have studied Cham naval tactics, developing countermeasures that neutralised their advantage on water. By 1181, after a series of battles on land and water, including a great naval engagement on the Tonle Sap depicted in the bas-reliefs of the Bayan, Jayavarman had driven the Chams from Khmer territory. Jayavarman VII's coronation in 1181, at the age of approximately 56, marked the beginning of one of the most transformative reigns in Khmer history. Unlike his predecessors, who had claimed divine mandate through traditional Hindu ceremonies, Jayavarman was a devoted Mahayana Buddhist who would fundamentally alter the religious and ideological foundations of the empire. His personal faith, possibly influenced by the trauma of the Cham invasion and the suffering he had witnessed, emphasized compassion and the alleviation of human misery rather than the maintenance of cosmic order through royal ritual. The new king's building program exceeded even that of Suryavarman II in scale and ambition, but with a fundamentally different purpose. Where previous kings had built temples to demonstrate their divine connections and ensure favourable rebirth, Jayavarman VII constructed hospitals, rest houses, and monasteries designed to serve the practical and spiritual needs of his subjects. The inscription from the hospital at Saiphong states that he suffered from the illnesses of his subjects more than from his own. The pain that affected men's bodies became for him a spiritual pain that was more piercing. The construction of Angkor Thom, Jayavarman VII's new capital city, represented urban planning on a scale that dwarfed all previous Khmer cities. Enclosed within walls 8 metres high and 12 kilometres in circumference, the city could house a population estimated at nearly 1 million people. The walls were surrounded by a moat 100 metres wide, crossed by causeways decorated with magnificent sculptures. At each of the 5 gates, giant faces gazed out in the 4 cardinal directions, their serene expressions embodying the Buddhist concept of loving kindness directed toward all beings. At the heart of Angkor Thom stood the Bayon, Jayavarman VII's state temple, and one of the most enigmatic monuments in world architecture. Unlike the symmetrical clarity of Angkor Wat, the Bayon presents a complex, almost chaotic appearance from ground level, with its 54 towers bearing over 200 giant faces. These faces, possibly representing Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, or perhaps portraits of Jayavarman VII himself in his role as a Bodhisattva king, gaze serenely in all directions with an expression that has captivated visitors for centuries. The ambiguity is perhaps intentional, reflecting the Mahayana Buddhist concept that enlightened beings manifest in multiple forms to save all sentient beings. The architectural complexity of the Bayon reflects its complicated construction history, with evidence of multiple building phases and changes in design. The temple began as a more conventional structure, but was modified repeatedly as Jayavarman VII's religious vision evolved. The result is a monument that seems to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, with galleries, chambers, and towers interpenetrating in ways that defy simple description. Walking through the Bayon is less like exploring a building than experiencing a three-dimensional mandala, where every turn reveals new perspectives and hidden meanings. The bas-reliefs of the Bayon mark a revolutionary departure from earlier Khmer art in both style and subject matter. While Angkor Wat's reliefs depicted mythological scenes and royal processions in idealized form, the Bayon's galleries show scenes from daily life with unprecedented realism. Market scenes depict merchants haggling over prices, fishermen casting nets, women giving birth, and people preparing meals. Military scenes show not just glorious victories, but also the suffering of war, with wounded soldiers and grieving families. This attention to ordinary human experience reflects the Buddhist emphasis on the universality of suffering and the importance of compassion for all beings. The religious transformation that Jayavarman VII initiated extended far beyond temple construction to encompass a fundamental restructuring of Khmer society. Mahayana Buddhism, with its emphasis on universal salvation and the bodhisattva ideal, provided a different model of kingship than the Hindu concept of the Deva Raja. The king was no longer a god-king maintaining cosmic order through ritual, but a bodhisattva king working for the salvation of all his subjects. This shift had profound implications for governance, social relations, and cultural expression. The network of hospitals that Jayavarman VII established across the empire represents one of history's earliest attempts at public healthcare. 102 hospitals were constructed, each serving a defined geographic area and population. The hospitals were staffed with physicians, nurses, and support personnel, all maintained at royal expense. Detailed inscriptions specify the medicines to be stocked, including 32 different herbal preparations, and the daily rations for patients and staff. The hospitals served all people regardless of social status, a radical departure from earlier periods when medical care was largely restricted to the elite. The rest houses constructed along major roads throughout the empire provided another innovation in public welfare. These dharmashalas, built at intervals of approximately 15 kilometres, offered free shelter and food to travellers, pilgrims, and merchants. Each rest house included facilities for humans and animals, storage areas for goods, and shrines for religious observance. The network of rest houses facilitated trade and pilgrimage while also serving as centres for the dissemination of Buddhist teachings and royal propaganda. The educational initiatives of Jayavarman VII's reign transformed Khmer intellectual life. Buddhist monasteries became centres of learning where students studied not just religious texts, but also medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and literature. The emphasis shifted from the preservation of exclusive Brahmanical knowledge to the wider dissemination of practical and spiritual education. Libraries were established to preserve and copy texts, with scribes working to translate important works from Sanskrit and Pali into Khmer, making them accessible to a broader audience. The economic policies of Jayavarman VII's reign had to support an unprecedented level of construction and public services, while also maintaining military forces and administrative apparatus. The king appears to have intensified agricultural production through expanded irrigation works and the introduction of new rice varieties. Trade was encouraged through improved infrastructure and standardized weights and measures. Yet the enormous demands of the building program and public services must have placed tremendous strain on the population, requiring corvée labour and heavy taxation. The military achievements of Jayavarman VII extended beyond the liberation of Angkor to include successful campaigns against Champa and other neighbouring kingdoms. The Khmer armies not only defeated the Chams, but occupied their capital and annexed much of their territory, reversing the humiliation of 1177. Campaigns in the west extended Khmer control deep into what is now Thailand, while northern expeditions reached into Laos and possibly southern China. These conquests brought tribute and slaves to support the king's ambitious projects, while also spreading Mahayana Buddhism throughout Southeast Asia. The naval forces under Jayavarman VII deserve special consideration, as they played a crucial role in defeating the Chams and maintaining control over riverine and coastal areas. The bas-reliefs at the Bayan and Bante Chmar provide detailed depictions of Khmer naval vessels and tactics. The ships shown range from small boats with a few oarsmen to large war vessels with multiple decks, armed warriors, and protective screens. The naval battles depicted show sophisticated tactics, including ramming, boarding, and the use of projectile weapons. The artistic innovations of Jayavarman VII's reign extended beyond architecture and relief carving to include sculpture, painting, and decorative arts. The portrait sculptures of the period show a new interest in psychological realism, with faces that convey individual personality rather than idealized types. The famous statue of Jayavarman VII in meditation captures both the spiritual intensity and the physical weariness of an aging ruler who had witnessed great suffering. The development of this portrait tradition represents a significant departure from earlier Khmer art, which had focused on idealized representations of divine and royal figures. The role of women in Jayavarman VII's Buddhist revolution was particularly significant. The king's two queens, Jayarajadevi and her sister Indradevi, were both accomplished scholars and devout Buddhists who played active roles in religious and educational initiatives. Indradevi, who became queen after her sister's death, was particularly renowned for her learning, serving as a teacher in Buddhist monasteries and composing Sanskrit poetry. The prominence of these royal women reflected broader opportunities for female participation in Buddhist institutions, where women could become nuns, teachers, and spiritual leaders. The religious pluralism that characterized Jayavarman VII's reign, despite his personal Buddhist devotion, demonstrates sophisticated political pragmatism. While promoting Buddhism through construction and patronage, the king continued to support Hindu temples and Brahmanical institutions. Existing Hindu monuments were maintained and even expanded, while new constructions often incorporated both Buddhist and Hindu iconography. This inclusive approach helped to maintain social harmony in an empire with diverse religious communities. The inscriptions from Jayavarman VII's reign provide remarkable insights into his philosophy of governance and personal spiritual journey. The king describes his motivation as arising from witnessing the suffering caused by the Cham invasion and his determination to protect his subjects from future calamities. He speaks of sleepless nights spent worrying about the welfare of his people and his desire to lead all beings to enlightenment. This personal, emotional tone contrasts sharply with the formal, distant language of earlier royal inscriptions. The Ta Prohm temple, dedicated to the king's mother in the form of Prajnaparamita, the Buddhist goddess of wisdom, exemplifies the personal dimension of Jayavarman VII's religious architecture. The temple's inscription provides detailed statistics about its establishment, including 79,365 people assigned to its service, including 18 high priests, 2,940 officials, 2,202 assistants, and 615 dancers. These numbers, even if somewhat exaggerated, indicate the enormous human resources devoted to maintaining major religious establishments. The Preah Khan temple, dedicated to the king's father, served multiple functions as temple, university, and administrative centre. The complex included facilities for Buddhist and Hindu worship, libraries, dancing halls, and administrative offices. The inscription describes an annual festival where golden images of Buddhist and Hindu deities from across the empire were brought to Preah Khan for ceremonies that reinforced imperial unity through shared religious observance. The temple's design, with its axial galleries and multiple enclosures, created spaces for different activities and communities while maintaining overall architectural unity. The Neakpeen temple, built on an artificial island in the Jayavarman Barre, represents a unique architectural and symbolic achievement. The central sanctuary, surrounded by 4 pools, recreated the mythical Lake Anavatapta in the Himalayas, whose waters were believed to cure all illnesses. Pilgrims would bathe in the pools, with water flowing through spouts carved as human and animal heads, each associated with different healing properties. The temple thus combined religious symbolism with practical function as a healing centre. The infrastructure projects of Jayavarman VII's reign included not just temples and public buildings, but also practical works like bridges, canals, and reservoirs. The ancient bridge at Kampong Day, with its carved Naga balustrades, still carries traffic today, testament to the engineering skill of Khmer builders. The expansion and improvement of the road network facilitated administration, trade, and military movement, while also serving religious purposes by connecting pilgrimage sites. The decline that began in the later years of Jayavarman VII's reign has been attributed to various factors, including exhaustion from continuous construction projects, military overextension, and possible environmental degradation. The king's death, probably around 1218, marked the end of large-scale construction at Angkor. His immediate successors faced rebellions in outlying provinces and renewed pressure from neighbouring kingdoms. The vast temple complexes and public works required constant maintenance that strained diminishing resources. The religious reaction that followed Jayavarman VII's death saw a partial restoration of Hinduism and the defacement of many Buddhist images. The face towers of the Bayon were left intact, possibly because their removal would have compromised structural integrity, but Buddha images throughout the empire were systematically transformed into Hindu deities or destroyed. This iconoclastic period reflects deep religious tensions that Jayavarman VII's inclusive policies had managed to suppress but not eliminate. Despite the subsequent reaction, Jayavarman VII's transformation of the Khmer Empire left permanent marks on Southeast Asian civilization. The spread of Theravada Buddhism, which would eventually become the dominant religion of mainland Southeast Asia, was facilitated by the infrastructure and institutions he established. The concept of Buddhist kingship, emphasizing royal compassion and service to subjects, influenced political thought throughout the region. The artistic and architectural innovations of his reign created new forms that would be adapted and developed by successor states. Beyond the grand temples and royal inscriptions that dominate our view of the Khmer Empire lies the story of millions of ordinary people whose daily lives sustained one of history's most remarkable civilizations. These farmers and fishermen, artisans and merchants, slaves and nobles created a complex society that flourished for 6 centuries in the challenging environment of tropical Southeast Asia. Their achievements in agriculture, craft production, and social organization made possible the monuments we admire today, while their beliefs, customs, and daily routines shaped a distinctive culture that continues to influence Cambodia and neighbouring countries. The foundation of Khmer society was the village, where the vast majority of the population lived and worked. A typical village consisted of houses built on stilts, raised above the ground to protect against flooding and provide ventilation in the humid climate. These structures, made primarily of wood, bamboo, and thatch, have left little archaeological trace, but contemporary bas-reliefs and Chinese accounts provide detailed descriptions. The houses were typically single-room structures where entire families lived, cooked and slept, with separate structures for storage and livestock. The spatial organisation of villages reflected both practical needs and cosmological beliefs. Houses were oriented according to cardinal directions, with important activities performed in auspicious locations. The village temple or shrine occupied a central position, serving as both religious centre and community gathering place. Ponds and wells provided water for drinking and daily use, while also serving ritual purposes. Gardens and orchards surrounded the houses, providing vegetables, fruits, and medicinal plants for household consumption. The daily rhythm of village life followed the agricultural calendar, with activities determined by the monsoon cycle and the demands of rice cultivation. The workday began before dawn, with families rising to prepare the morning meal of rice porridge flavoured with fish or vegetables. Men and women worked together in the fields during planting and harvesting seasons. Though certain tasks were gender-specific, men typically handled ploughing and heavy labour, while women managed transplanting and seed selection. Children contributed according to their age, watching younger siblings, tending animals, or helping with lighter agricultural tasks. Rice cultivation in the Khmer Empire achieved levels of productivity that supported one of the ancient world's densest populations. The combination of fertile soils, reliable water supply from the Barre system, and sophisticated agricultural techniques allowed for multiple harvests per year in some areas. Farmers had developed numerous rice varieties adapted to different conditions: deep water rice for flood-prone areas, dry rice for upland fields, and glutinous rice for special occasions. The selection and preservation of seed rice was a crucial skill passed down through generations. Beyond rice, Khmer farmers cultivated a diverse array of crops that provided both sustenance and market income. Vegetables including cucumbers, gourds, beans and leafy greens grew in gardens fertilized with household waste and pond mud. Fruit trees such as mango, coconut, banana and jackfruit provided food and construction materials. Sugar palms were particularly valuable, providing sugar, wine, thatch and timber. Cotton cultivation supplied fibre for clothing, while mulberry trees supported silk production in some regions. Animal husbandry complemented crop production in the rural economy. Water buffalo and oxen provided draft power for ploughing and transportation. Pigs and chickens supplied meat for special occasions and religious offerings. Ducks thrived in the watery environment of rice fields, providing eggs and meat while controlling pests. Fish culture in ponds and rice fields added protein to the diet and generated income through local markets. The integration of crops, livestock, and aquaculture created resilient agricultural systems that could withstand environmental fluctuations. The rivers, lakes, and flooded forests of the Khmer Empire provided abundant resources that supplemented agricultural production. Fishing was a major occupation, with various techniques employed depending on season and location. During the annual flood recession, entire communities participated in harvesting fish trapped in temporary pools. Sophisticated trap systems, some depicted in temple bas-reliefs, captured migrating fish. Fermented fish paste, similar to modern prahok, provided a crucial source of protein that could be preserved for year-round consumption. Forest resources played essential roles in daily life and the broader economy. Villagers collected wild vegetables, mushrooms, and fruits that supplemented cultivated foods. Medicinal plants treated common ailments, with knowledge of their properties transmitted through oral tradition and practical experience. Timber for construction, firewood for cooking, and materials for handicrafts all came from managed forest areas. Valuable forest products like resins, aromatic woods, and honey were collected for trade, providing cash income for rural households. The social structure of Khmer villages was hierarchical but not rigid, allowing for some social mobility through merit, wealth accumulation, or royal service. Village headmen, usually chosen from prominent families, mediated between communities and higher authorities. They organised corvée labour for public works, collected taxes, and adjudicated minor disputes. Their position required balancing loyalty to the state with advocacy for village interests, a delicate task that required diplomatic skills and local credibility. The extended family formed the basic social unit, with multiple generations often sharing compounds, if not houses. Family solidarity provided social security in a world without formal welfare systems. Elderly parents lived with adult children who supported them in exchange for childcare and household assistance. Family networks facilitated economic activities through labour sharing during peak agricultural seasons and mutual aid during crises. Marriage alliances between families created broader networks of reciprocal obligations that strengthened community cohesion. The institution of debt slavery reveals the economic vulnerabilities faced by ordinary Khmer people. Families facing crop failure, illness, or other crises might borrow rice or money, pledging themselves or family members as collateral. If unable to repay, they became debt slaves, working for creditors until the obligation was satisfied. While slaves, they retained certain rights and could not be killed or seriously mistreated without legal consequences. Temple slaves occupied a special category, donated by kings or nobles to serve religious institutions, their service considered meritorious for both donor and slave. Artisans and craft specialists occupied important positions in Khmer society, their skills essential for both daily life and monumental construction. Potters produced ceramics for cooking, storage, and ritual use, with distinctive styles developing in different regions. Blacksmiths forged agricultural tools, weapons, and architectural elements. Their work surrounded by ritual prescriptions reflecting the dangerous power of metallurgy. Weavers, predominantly women, created textiles ranging from simple cotton cloth to elaborate silk garments for the elite. The organisation of craft production varied from household-based activities to specialised workshops serving royal and temple demands. In villages, craft production supplemented agricultural income, with farmers engaging in pottery, basketry, or weaving during slack seasons. Urban areas and temple complexes supported full-time specialists who achieved remarkable skill levels. The sculptors who carved temple reliefs, the architects who designed monuments, and the engineers who constructed hydraulic works represented the pinnacle of technical achievement. Markets served as crucial nodes of economic and social interaction, bringing together producers and consumers from different communities. Local markets operated on regular cycles, with vendors travelling between sites according to established schedules. These markets handled everyday necessities: rice, vegetables, fish, cloth, pottery and tools. Larger regional markets offered specialised products and served as collection points for goods destined for long-distance trade. Market days were social occasions where people exchanged news, arranged marriages, and participated in entertainment. The Chinese diplomat Zhou Daguan, who visited Angkor in 1296-1297, provides valuable eyewitness accounts of market activities. He describes markets dominated by women traders, a pattern that persists in Cambodia today. Goods were displayed on mats spread on the ground, with vendors calling out to attract customers. Transactions used a combination of barter and currency, including gold, silver, and imported Chinese coins. Market officials, appointed by the state, maintained order, collected taxes, and ensured fair weights and measures. Urban life in the Khmer Empire, particularly in and around Angkor, differed significantly from rural existence. Cities supported diverse populations of officials, priests, soldiers, merchants, and artisans. Urban dwellers had access to imported goods, entertainment, and religious ceremonies on a scale unknown in villages. Yet cities also presented challenges: crowding, sanitation problems, and dependence on rural food supplies. The urban elite lived in substantial houses with tiled roofs and wooden walls, while workers crowded into simpler structures similar to rural houses. The royal palace and noble residences represented the apex of domestic architecture. Though being built primarily of wood, they have not survived. Contemporary accounts and bas-relief depictions show multi-storey structures with elaborate carved decorations surrounded by gardens and pavilions. The palace complex included audience halls, living quarters, treasuries and shrines, all arranged according to cosmological principles. Noble houses emulated royal architecture on a smaller scale, with reception areas for clients and separate quarters for women and servants. The daily life of the elite contrasted sharply with that of commoners. Nobles rose late, bathed in perfumed water, and dressed in silk garments and gold jewellery. Their meals included multiple dishes of meat, fish, vegetables, and fruits, served on silver or ceramic plates. Afternoons might be spent in administrative duties, religious observances, or leisure activities like chess, music, or poetry. Evenings featured elaborate dinners, theatrical performances, and social gatherings. This luxurious lifestyle depended on the labour of numerous servants and slaves who handled all practical tasks. Education in the Khmer Empire was primarily religious in nature, but included practical subjects necessary for administration and commerce. Temple schools taught boys to read and write Khmer and Sanskrit, to perform religious rituals, and to understand basic mathematics and astronomy. Elite families employed private tutors who provided more comprehensive education, including literature, law, and statecraft. Girls from noble families received education in household management, religious observance, and sometimes literacy, though their educational opportunities were more limited than boys. The transmission of practical knowledge occurred through apprenticeship and family tradition rather than formal schooling. Young people learned agricultural techniques by working alongside parents and relatives. Craft skills passed from master to apprentice through years of observation and practice. Medical knowledge, particularly related to childbirth and herbal medicine, transmitted through generations of women healers. This informal education system effectively preserved and transmitted the technical knowledge that sustained Khmer civilization. Religious life permeated every aspect of Khmer society, from royal ceremonies to village rituals. While the great temples served state cults and elite devotion, local shrines addressed the spiritual needs of ordinary people. Village temples, modest structures of wood or brick, housed images of Hindu deities, Buddha figures, and local spirits. Daily worship included offerings of flowers, incense, and food, with more elaborate ceremonies marking important occasions. The religious calendar structured the year, with festivals providing occasions for community celebration and renewal of social bonds. The syncretic nature of Khmer religion allowed for remarkable diversity in belief and practice. Hindu deities coexisted with Buddhist figures and indigenous spirits in a complex pantheon that addressed different needs and circumstances. Ancestor worship remained fundamental, with spirits of deceased relatives requiring regular offerings and commemoration. Nature spirits inhabited trees, rocks, and water sources, demanding respect and propitiation. This religious pluralism provided flexibility in addressing life's uncertainties while maintaining cultural continuity. The role of women in Khmer society was complex and varied considerably by class and circumstance. Elite women could own property, engage in trade, and exercise considerable influence through their husbands and sons. Some queens and princesses ruled territories, commanded armies, and patronized religious institutions. Ordinary women managed households, participated in agricultural work, dominated local market trade, and served as healers and midwives. While formally subordinate to male authority, women exercised significant practical power within their spheres of influence. Marriage customs reflected both social hierarchy and economic considerations. Elite marriages were political alliances negotiated between families, with bride prices and dowries involving substantial wealth transfers. Common people had more freedom in choosing partners, though parental approval remained important. Marriage ceremonies ranged from elaborate multi-day celebrations for the wealthy to simple exchanges of vows for the poor. Polygamy was permitted but largely restricted to those who could afford multiple households. Divorce was possible, with women retaining property they brought to marriage. The treatment of illness and injury combined spiritual and practical approaches. Local healers used herbal remedies, massage, and dietary prescriptions to treat common ailments. More serious conditions might require consultation with spirit mediums or Buddhist monks who performed healing rituals. The hospitals established by Jayavarman II provided more systematic medical care, with trained physicians using Indian medical texts alongside local knowledge. Surgical procedures, including cataract removal and bone setting, were performed by specialists. The integration of different medical traditions created a healthcare system that addressed both physical and spiritual dimensions of illness. Entertainment and leisure activities provided relief from daily labour and reinforced social bonds. Village festivals featured music, dancing, and theatrical performances that retold religious stories and historical events. Shadow puppet shows, using leather figures manipulated behind illuminated screens, entertained audiences while transmitting cultural values. Cockfighting, boat racing, and martial arts competitions provided excitement and opportunities for gambling. Board games and dice games were popular among all classes, with Chinese visitors noting the Khmer passion for gaming. The classical dance tradition, that would become one of Cambodia's most distinctive art forms, developed in the Angkorian period. Temple dancers, dedicated to divine service, performed sacred dances that told religious stories through stylized movements and gestures. The apsara figures carved on temple walls preserve the postures and costumes of these performances. Court dancers entertained royalty with more secular performances, though the distinction between sacred and profane was never absolute. The transmission of dance traditions through generations of performers preserved ancient stories and aesthetic values. Music accompanied most aspects of Khmer life, from work songs in the fields to elaborate orchestral performances at court. Temple bas-reliefs depict various musical instruments: drums, gongs, xylophones, flutes, and stringed instruments. Different musical styles serve different functions: processional music for religious ceremonies, military music for royal processions, and folk songs for village celebrations. The Pin Peet Orchestra, which continues in modern Cambodia, has its origins in Angkorian court music, demonstrating remarkable cultural continuity. The legal system that governed daily life combined royal edicts, Indian law codes, and customary practices. Local disputes were typically resolved through village mediation, with headmen and elders serving as arbitrators. More serious cases went to provincial courts presided over by royal appointees. The king served as supreme judge, with the power to review cases and grant pardons. Punishments ranged from fines and forced labour to physical mutilation and death, with penalties varying by social status. The legal system, while harsh by modern standards, provided predictable rules that enabled complex social and economic interactions. The temples that rise from the Cambodian landscape, like mountains of carved stone, represent far more than religious monuments or royal vanity projects. They embody the Khmer Empire's understanding of the cosmos, their mastery of engineering and logistics, and their ability to transform spiritual vision into physical reality. Each temple was a microcosm, a representation of the universe in stone that served simultaneously as dwelling place for the gods, memorial to royal power, and demonstration of the harmony between human ambition and divine order. The conceptual foundation of Khmer temple architecture rested on the ancient Indian concept of the temple as Mount Meru, the cosmic mountain at the centre of the universe. According to Hindu and Buddhist cosmology, Mount Meru rises through multiple levels inhabited by various classes of beings, with the gods dwelling at its summit. The Temple Mountain recreated this cosmic geography in architectural form, with ascending terraces representing different celestial realms, and the central sanctuary housing the primary deity at the symbolic summit. The evolution of the Temple Mountain form through Khmer history reveals both continuity and innovation. Early temples like Ak Yum from the 8th century show experimental attempts to create vertical monuments with uncertain proportions and structural problems. By the time of the Ba Kong in the late 9th century, Khmer architects had developed confident solutions to the challenges of building artificial mountains. The progression from Ba Kong through Ba Phuon to Angkor Wat demonstrates increasing sophistication in design, engineering, and symbolic elaboration. The process of temple construction began long before the first stone was laid, with extensive planning and preparation that could take years. Site selection involved both practical and spiritual considerations. The location needed suitable foundation conditions, access to building materials, and water for construction and ritual purposes. Equally important were cosmological factors: alignment with cardinal directions, relationship to existing sacred sites, and auspicious astrological timing. Brahmin priests and court astronomers collaborated to ensure that every aspect of the temple's placement and orientation conformed to religious requirements. The logistics of temple construction required organizational capabilities comparable to modern megaprojects. Sandstone, the primary building material for major temples, had to be quarried from the Kulen Mountains, located 30 to 50 kilometers from Angkor. Each block, weighing up to several tons, was rough cut at the quarry, then transported to the construction site. The journey involved combinations of elephant power, wooden rollers, and canal barges, with hundreds of workers coordinating their efforts to move single blocks. The quantity of stone required for a major temple, like Angkor Wat, has been estimated at over 5 million tons, representing millions of person-days of labour just for quarrying and transport. The Khmer developed sophisticated techniques for working sandstone that allowed for both structural stability and decorative refinement. Unlike many ancient civilizations that used mortar, Khmer builders relied primarily on precise cutting and gravity to hold structures together. Stones were shaped using iron tools, including chisels, saws, and drills, with final surfaces polished using abrasives. The precision achieved is remarkable, with joints between stones often less than a millimetre wide. This dry stone construction technique required exceptional skill, but produced structures that could flex slightly during earthquakes without catastrophic failure. The engineering challenges of building tall structures on the soft soils of the Angkorian plain required innovative foundation solutions. Excavations have revealed that major temples rest on foundation platforms of laterite and sand that distribute weight over large areas. These platforms, sometimes extending several metres below ground level, prevented differential settlement that could crack or topple structures. Drainage systems channeled water away from foundations, preventing erosion and maintaining soil stability. The success of these techniques is evident in the survival of structures for nearly 1,000 years in a challenging tropical environment. The decorative programs of Khmer temples integrated architecture and sculpture into unified artistic statements. Every surface that could be carved received decoration, from massive bas-relief panels covering hundreds of square metres to tiny details on door frames and column capitals. The iconographic programs were carefully planned to convey religious narratives, cosmological concepts, and political messages. At Angkor Wat, the famous bas-relief galleries depict scenes from Hindu epics, historical events, and visions of heaven and hell, creating a visual encyclopedia of Khmer culture and belief. The technical achievement of Khmer relief carving deserves special recognition. Working with sandstone of varying hardness and grain, sculptors achieved remarkable effects of depth and detail. The technique of bas-relief, where figures project slightly from the background, was perfected to create illusions of three-dimensional space on flat surfaces. Different depths of carving, from deep relief for major figures to shallow incision for background details, created visual hierarchies that guided viewers through complex narratives. The preservation of tool marks in unfinished sections reveals the sequence of carving operations and the division of labour among specialists. The architectural innovation of the corbelled arch, while limiting compared to the true arch, became a defining characteristic of Khmer architecture. This technique, where stones project progressively inward until they meet, created passages and chambers without requiring temporary support during construction. The Khmer refined this ancient technique to achieve remarkable spans and heights, with some galleries at Angkor Wat extending for hundreds of metres. The visual effect of long corbelled galleries with light filtering through windows to create dramatic patterns of illumination and shadow remains one of the most memorable experiences of visiting Khmer temples. Water management within temple complexes served both practical and symbolic functions. Moats surrounding temples represented the cosmic oceans that surround Mount Meru, while also providing water for construction and ritual purposes. Elaborate drainage systems channeled rainwater away from structures while maintaining pools for ritual ablutions. Some temples incorporated hydraulic features, like fountains and water channels, that required precise engineering to function properly. The integration of water features created sensory experiences that enhanced the sacred atmosphere of temple spaces. The orientation and proportions of Khmer temples followed precise mathematical and astronomical principles. Temples were aligned with cardinal directions, with entrances typically facing east toward the rising sun. The dimensions of structures often incorporated sacred numbers and ratios derived from Indian mathematical texts. Recent studies have revealed astronomical alignments in major temples, with sightlines marking solstices, equinoxes, and other celestial events. These alignments transformed temples into vast astronomical instruments that connected earthly and celestial realms. The construction workforce for major temples included diverse specialists whose skills were essential for successful completion. Master architects, probably trained in Indian architectural texts, designed overall plans and supervised construction. Stone masons shaped blocks and carved decorative elements. Engineers solved structural problems and managed logistics. Sculptors created religious images and decorative carvings. Metal workers forged tools and created bronze fittings. Each group had its own organization and traditions, with knowledge transmitted through apprenticeship systems. The question of construction time for major temples has generated considerable scholarly debate. Angkor Wat, the largest and most complex temple, was apparently completed within the 37-year reign of Jayavarman II, suggesting a construction period of perhaps 20 to 30 years. This timeline required thousands of workers, labouring continuously, with different phases of construction proceeding simultaneously. The ability to maintain such a workforce while continuing other state functions demonstrates remarkable economic and organisational capacity. The symbolic programs of temples extended beyond obvious religious imagery to include complex numerological and cosmological codes. The number of towers, steps, and decorative elements often carried symbolic significance. At Angkor Wat, the dimensions of the central sanctuary encode astronomical cycles and mythological time periods. The arrangement of galleries and chambers created ritual paths that pilgrims followed, their movement through space recapitulating spiritual journeys described in religious texts. Every aspect of design contributed to creating environments that facilitated religious experience and reinforced cosmological understanding. The adaptation of temple designs to different religious traditions demonstrates Khmer architectural flexibility. While maintaining basic forms, architects modified layouts and decorative programs to serve Hindu and Buddhist cults. The transformation of the Bayon from a Hindu to a Buddhist monument involved adding new structures and recarving existing decorations without compromising structural integrity. This adaptability allowed temples to remain relevant through religious changes, though it sometimes creates confusion for modern scholars trying to understand original intentions. The Barre system represents hydraulic engineering achievement equal to the temples in scale and sophistication. These enormous reservoirs, the largest covering 16 square kilometres, required moving millions of cubic metres of earth to create embankments up to 15 metres high. The engineering challenges included ensuring watertightness, preventing erosion, and managing overflow during exceptional floods. Inlet and outlet structures controlled water flow, with some incorporating sophisticated sluice gates that allowed precise regulation. The successful functioning of these systems for centuries demonstrates deep understanding of hydraulic principles. The purposes served by the barrays extended beyond simple water storage for irrigation. They provided water for temple moats and urban populations, supported fish cultivation, and facilitated transportation. Religious ceremonies utilized barre waters for ritual purposes, with island temples serving as destinations for sacred boat processions. The barrays also modified local climate, with evaporation cooling surrounding areas and increasing humidity. This environmental modification created more comfortable conditions in temple complexes and urban areas. The canal systems that connected barrays, rivers, and agricultural areas required precise surveying and construction. With minimal elevation changes across the Angkorian plain, engineers had to achieve exact gradients to ensure proper flow without erosion. The canals served multiple functions: irrigation, drainage, transportation, and defence. Some channels were navigable by substantial vessels, allowing movement of construction materials and agricultural products. The integration of natural waterways with artificial channels created a managed hydrological system that supported intensive agriculture and urban concentration. The roads and bridges constructed during the Angkorian period facilitated communication and control across the empire. Major highways, some 10 metres wide and raised above flood level, connected Angkor with provincial centres. These roads were engineering achievements in their own right, requiring extensive earthworks and drainage systems to remain passable during monsoon seasons. Stone bridges crossed rivers and canals, with some featuring elaborate Naga balustrades and guardian figures. The durability of these structures is remarkable, with several bridges still carrying traffic today. The technological innovations developed by Khmer engineers influenced construction throughout Southeast Asia. Techniques for foundation construction in soft soils, methods for moving and placing massive stones, and solutions for hydraulic management spread to neighbouring regions. The architectural vocabulary developed at Angkor, including decorative motifs and structural forms, appeared in temples built by successor states. This technological diffusion demonstrates that the Khmer Empire was not isolated but part of broader networks of knowledge exchange. The maintenance and restoration of temples required continuous effort throughout the Angkorian period. Inscriptions record endowments for temple upkeep, including provisions for cleaning, repair, and ritual activities. Skilled craftsmen were permanently attached to major temples to handle routine maintenance and emergency repairs. When structural problems developed, as at the Bafyeon, major reconstruction efforts were undertaken. This ongoing maintenance was essential for preserving structures in the tropical environment, where vegetation, water, and temperature fluctuations constantly threatened structural integrity. The decline in temple construction after Jayavarman II reflects multiple factors beyond simple exhaustion. The shift from Hinduism to Theravada Buddhism reduced emphasis on monumental architecture in favour of simpler wooden structures. Economic challenges limited resources available for construction. Environmental degradation may have reduced agricultural surpluses that supported building projects. Yet even during this decline, existing temples continued to function and receive maintenance, demonstrating the deep cultural importance of these monuments. The rediscovery and restoration of Angkorian temples in the modern era has revealed new information about construction techniques, while also raising questions about conservation approaches. Archaeological excavations have uncovered foundation systems, construction ramps, and unfinished sections that illuminate building processes. Modern restoration efforts using both traditional techniques and contemporary technology have saved structures from collapse while sometimes controversially altering their historic character. The ongoing dialogue between preservation and reconstruction reflects broader questions about how societies value and interpret their architectural heritage. The Khmer Empire's transformation from a collection of principalities along the Mekong River into the dominant power of mainland Southeast Asia required military capabilities that matched its architectural ambitions. The armies that marched from Angkor conquered territories spanning from the South China Sea to the Bay of Bengal, defeating rivals who had their own proud military traditions and defending the empire's heartland against repeated invasions. Understanding Khmer military organization, strategy, and technology reveals how this civilization projected power across vast distances while maintaining control over diverse populations and challenging terrain. The foundation of Khmer military power rested on a complex system of obligation and hierarchy that could mobilize substantial forces when needed. At the empire's core stood professional soldiers who served as royal guards and formed the nucleus of expeditionary forces. These career warriors, trained from youth in weapons and tactics, provided the expertise and leadership essential for military success. Surrounding this professional corps were provincial levies, drawn from the general population according to quotas established by royal decree. Village headmen were responsible for providing specified numbers of men when called, with communities suffering penalties if they failed to meet obligations. The social stratification of Khmer society extended into military organisation, with distinct roles and equipment for different classes. Noble warriors, often depicted in temple reliefs, wearing elaborate armour and wielding decorated weapons, served as cavalry and unit commanders. They brought their own equipment and retainers, maintaining military readiness as part of their aristocratic identity. Common soldiers, drawn from farming families, served as infantry with simpler equipment, often provided by the state or their communities. This dual system combined the expertise of professional warriors with the mass mobilization capabilities necessary for major campaigns. The Elephant Corps represented the apex of Khmer military power, serving functions comparable to modern tank units. War elephants, carefully selected and trained from youth, could carry several warriors, while terrifying enemy forces with their size and power. The lead warrior, typically an aristocrat, controlled the elephant, while archers or spearmen riding in howdahs provided offensive capability. Elephants wore armour made from leather or metal plates, protecting them from arrows and spears. The psychological impact of charging elephants often broke enemy formations before physical contact occurred. The logistics of maintaining war elephants reveal the organisational sophistication required for Khmer military operations. Each elephant required enormous quantities of food, consuming up to 200 kilograms of vegetation daily. Specialised handlers, known as mahouts, developed intimate relationships with individual animals, understanding their temperaments and capabilities. Medical care for elephants involved traditional remedies and surgical procedures, with veterinary knowledge transmitted through generations of specialists. The investment required to maintain even a small elephant corps demonstrates the economic resources available to Khmer rulers. Cavalry forces, though less prominent than elephants in temple depictions, played crucial roles in reconnaissance, rapid strikes, and pursuit of defeated enemies. Horses, imported from the mainland Southeast Asian highlands, or possibly from India, required careful acclimatization to the lowland environment. Khmer cavalry appears to have been relatively lightly equipped compared to contemporary Chinese or Indian forces, emphasizing mobility over heavy armor. The combination of elephant and horse cavalry gave Khmer armies flexibility in responding to different tactical situations. The infantry that formed the bulk of Khmer armies fought with weapons that combined local traditions with imported technologies. Spears and pikes served as primary weapons, with different lengths for different tactical roles. Swords, both straight and curved varieties, provided close combat capability. Archery played a crucial role, with both simple bows and crossbows employed. The crossbow, possibly adopted from Chinese models, provided greater penetrating power, though slower rate of fire than traditional bows. Shields made from wood, leather, or woven rattan offered protection while maintaining mobility in the tropical climate. The armour worn by Khmer soldiers varied considerably by rank and function. Elite warriors wore elaborate protection, including helmets, breastplates, and limb guards made from leather, bronze, or iron. Common soldiers made do with simpler protection, often just padded garments or leather jerkins. The tropical climate made heavy armour impractical for extended operations, forcing a balance between protection and heat exhaustion. Temple reliefs show considerable variation in military dress, suggesting that units maintained distinctive appearances that aided battlefield identification. Naval forces played crucial roles in Khmer military operations, particularly given the empire's extensive river systems and maritime frontiers. The Tonle Sap and Mekong River served as highways for military movement, allowing rapid deployment of forces to threatened areas. Khmer naval vessels ranged from small patrol boats to large warships capable of carrying dozens of warriors. The bas-reliefs at the Bayon provide detailed depictions of naval battles, showing vessels equipped with rams, protective screens, and fighting platforms. The construction and maintenance of naval forces required specialized skills and infrastructure. Shipyards along major rivers built vessels using tropical hardwoods resistant to rot and marine borers. Different vessel types serve specific functions: fast scout boats for reconnaissance, troop transports for amphibious operations, and heavy warships for battle. Naval warriors received specialized training in shipboard combat and swimming, essential skills for riverine warfare. The ability to coordinate land and naval forces gave Khmer commanders significant tactical advantages. Siege warfare capabilities enabled Khmer armies to capture fortified positions and walled cities. Temple reliefs depict various siege engines, including catapults, battering rams, and mobile towers. The construction of these machines required skilled engineers accompanying armies on campaign. Siege tactics included surrounding fortifications to prevent relief or escape, undermining walls, and using projectile weapons to clear defenders from ramparts. The patience required for successful sieges, sometimes lasting months, demonstrates the logistical capabilities of Khmer armies to maintain forces in the field for extended periods. The fortifications that Khmer armies both attacked and defended reveal evolving military architecture. Early fortifications consisted primarily of earthen ramparts topped with wooden palisades, adequate against small-scale raids, but vulnerable to determined assault. Later periods saw construction of more elaborate defences, including stone walls, multiple defensive lines, and sophisticated gate complexes. The walls of Angkor Wat, with their height, thickness, and defensive features, represent the culmination of Khmer fortification design. Intelligence gathering and communication systems enabled Khmer commanders to coordinate operations across vast distances. Networks of spies and informants provided information about enemy movements and intentions. Messenger systems using riders, runners, and boats carried orders and reports between commanders and the capital. Signal fires and drums provided rapid communication over shorter distances. The ability to gather and process intelligence allowed Khmer forces to respond effectively to threats and opportunities. The supply systems that supported Khmer armies on campaign required careful planning and organisation. Military campaigns often coincided with harvest seasons, when agricultural surpluses were available and farmers could be mobilised without disrupting cultivation. Supply depots along major routes stored rice, dried fish, and other provisions. Armies also lived off the land through requisition or pillage, though this risked alienating populations in newly conquered territories. Medical support for wounded soldiers included field treatment and evacuation to temples that served as hospitals. Military training for Khmer soldiers combined practical weapon skills with spiritual preparation. Young nobles learned martial arts, horsemanship, and elephant handling as part of their education. Common soldiers received basic training in formation fighting and weapon use. Religious ceremonies before battles invoked divine protection and strengthened morale. Warriors wore amulets and received magical tattoos believed to provide supernatural protection. This combination of practical and spiritual preparation created confident soldiers who believed in both their skills and divine favour. The strategic thinking that guided Khmer military operations showed sophisticated understanding of geography, logistics, and psychology. Campaigns were planned to exploit seasonal advantages, such as attacking when rivers were navigable, but before monsoon rains made movement difficult. Multiple columns often converged on objectives from different directions, dividing enemy responses. Psychological warfare included displays of military might, distribution of propaganda, and treatment of surrendered enemies to encourage further submissions. The combination of force and diplomacy allowed the empire to expand while minimizing the costs of constant warfare. The expansion of the Khmer Empire followed patterns that balanced conquest with consolidation. Initial military victories were followed by administrative integration, with local rulers often retained under Khmer oversight. Military colonies were established in strategic locations, with soldiers receiving land grants in exchange for continued service. These colonies served as forward bases for further expansion while spreading Khmer culture and administrative practices. The gradual transformation of conquered territories into integral parts of the empire demonstrates long-term strategic thinking. The defensive strategies employed by the Khmer evolved in response to changing threats. Early periods focused on protecting the agricultural heartland around Tonle Sap from raids. As the empire expanded, defence in depth became necessary, with multiple lines of fortification and regional forces capable of responding to incursions. The traumatic Cham invasion of 1177 led to enhanced fortification of the capital and improved naval defences. The flexibility to adapt defensive strategies to new threats contributed to the empire's longevity. The treatment of prisoners and conquered populations varied depending on circumstances and policy. Mass deportations moved populations from rebellious areas to the imperial core, where they provided labour for construction projects. Skilled craftsmen and educated individuals were often integrated into Khmer society. Religious tolerance generally prevailed, with conquered peoples allowed to maintain their beliefs while acknowledging Khmer political supremacy. This relatively inclusive approach, compared to some contemporary empires, facilitated the integration of diverse populations. The economic impact of military activities significantly influenced imperial development. Successful campaigns brought tribute, slaves, and control of trade routes that enriched the royal treasury. Military expenditures, however, consumed enormous resources in equipment, provisions, and payments to soldiers. The balance between military costs and benefits shifted over time, with later periods seeing diminishing returns from conquest as the empire reached natural geographic limits and faced stronger resistance. The role of mercenaries and foreign military specialists added capabilities that native forces lacked. Chinese sources mention Khmer employment of Cham sailors and Malay warriors for specific campaigns. Foreign military engineers may have introduced new siege technologies. The presence of foreign fighters in Khmer armies demonstrates the empire's ability to attract and utilize diverse military talents. These mercenary forces, while useful, also posed potential threats if their loyalty wavered. The military culture that developed within the Khmer Empire influenced art, literature, and social values. Temple reliefs glorifying military victories served as propaganda while also preserving historical memory. Epic poems celebrated warrior heroes and martial virtues. Young men aspired to military glory as a path to social advancement. This militaristic culture, while supporting imperial expansion, also contributed to the cycles of violence that periodically destabilized the empire. The technological innovations in Khmer military affairs showed both indigenous development and adaptive borrowing. Metallurgy advanced to produce better weapons and armor. Elephant training techniques became increasingly sophisticated. Naval architecture evolved to create more effective warships. The selective adoption of foreign technologies like the crossbow demonstrates pragmatic willingness to enhance military capabilities regardless of origin. The decline of Khmer military power in the later Angkorian period resulted from multiple interconnected factors. The professional military class may have been weakened by continuous warfare and inadequate replacement. Economic difficulties reduced resources available for military expenditures. The rise of Thai kingdoms created new military challenges that traditional Khmer tactics struggled to address. Environmental changes, possibly affecting agricultural production, undermined the economic foundation of military power. The 13th century marked a turning point in the trajectory of the Khmer Empire, though the signs of decline were subtle at first and would take centuries to fully manifest. The death of Jayavarman II around 1218 ended not just a remarkable reign, but an era of confident expansion and monumental construction that had pushed the empire's resources to their limits. What followed was not dramatic collapse, but a gradual erosion of power, a slow retreat from greatness that saw the once mighty empire fragment, shrink, and eventually abandon its magnificent capital to the encroaching jungle. The immediate aftermath of Jayavarman VII's death revealed deep tensions within Khmer society that his strong rule had suppressed but not resolved. The Buddhist revolution he had championed had alienated traditional Hindu elites who saw their privileges and beliefs threatened by the new religious order. The massive construction projects and military campaigns of his reign had exhausted the population, with corvée labour demands and taxation reaching levels that strained the social contract between rulers and ruled. The very success of his reign in expanding the empire had created administrative challenges that proved increasingly difficult to manage. Jayavarman VIII, who ruled from approximately 1243 to 1295, presided over a Hindu reaction that sought to restore traditional religious structures while dismantling much of his predecessor's Buddhist legacy. This period witnessed systematic iconoclasm, with Buddha images throughout the empire defaced or transformed into Hindu deities. The famous faces of the Bayon were spared, perhaps because their removal would have compromised the temple's structural integrity, but thousands of smaller Buddhist images were destroyed or modified. This religious persecution created social divisions that weakened imperial cohesion at a time when unity was essential for confronting external threats. The economic foundations of the empire showed increasing strain during the 13th century. The intensive agricultural system that had supported Angkor's massive population required constant maintenance of irrigation infrastructure. Canals needed regular dredging, embankments required repair after each monsoon season, and the complex system of water distribution demanded careful management. As central authority weakened, maintenance became irregular, leading to decreased agricultural productivity. The silting of canals and deterioration of barays created a negative feedback loop where declining harvests reduced the resources available for infrastructure repair. Environmental factors may have contributed to agricultural difficulties. Recent paleoclimatic research suggests that the 13th and 14th centuries experienced unusual weather patterns, including severe droughts alternating with intense floods. The Khmer agricultural system, despite its sophistication, was calibrated for normal seasonal variations. Extreme weather events could devastate harvests, leading to famine and social unrest. The inability to maintain food security undermined royal authority and made population centres vulnerable to attack. The rise of Theravada Buddhism as the dominant religion among the Khmer population represented a profound cultural shift with significant political implications. Unlike Mahayana Buddhism or Hinduism, which emphasized elaborate rituals and temple construction, Theravada Buddhism focused on individual, spiritual development and simple monastic life. This religious transformation reduced the ideological justification for massive temple projects and the corvée labor they required. Wooden temples and modest stupas replaced stone monuments, leaving little trace for archaeologists, but marking a fundamental change in how the Khmer understood the relationship between religion and royal power. The external pressures on the empire intensified as neighbouring peoples grew stronger and more assertive. The Thai peoples, migrating southward from southern China, established kingdoms that increasingly challenged Khmer hegemony. Unlike previous enemies who could be defeated and absorbed, the Thai brought different military tactics, political structures, and settlement patterns that proved resistant to traditional Khmer methods of control. The kingdom of Sukhothai, established in the mid-13th century in what is now central Thailand, became a particular threat, combining military prowess with cultural dynamism that attracted populations away from Khmer rule. The Mongol invasions that devastated much of Asia in the 13th century, while not directly striking the Khmer heartland, had profound indirect effects. The Mongol conquest of the Dali kingdom in Yunnan accelerated Thai migration southward, increasing pressure on the Khmer Empire's northern frontiers. Trade routes were disrupted, affecting the luxury goods that sustained elite culture. The psychological impact of knowing that even great empires could fall to barbarian invaders may have undermined confidence in Khmer invincibility. Military challenges revealed the obsolescence of traditional Khmer warfare methods. The elephant corps that had dominated battlefields for centuries proved vulnerable to more mobile Thai forces using guerrilla tactics. The cost of maintaining professional armies and elephant units strained diminishing resources. Provincial commanders, facing threats that the capital could not address, increasingly acted independently, further fragmenting imperial authority. The military system that had built the empire proved inadequate for defending it under changed circumstances. The gradual loss of outlying territories followed a pattern of slow erosion rather than dramatic conquest. Provincial centres would stop sending tribute, local governors would declare independence or shift allegiance to rising powers, and Khmer military expeditions would fail to restore control. The western provinces in present-day Thailand were among the first to break away, followed by northern territories in Laos. Each loss reduced the empire's resource base, making it harder to maintain control over remaining territories. The city of Angkor itself began showing signs of strain by the late 13th century, the population possibly exceeding 1 million at its peak, stressed water resources and food supplies. Sanitation in such a dense urban environment posed constant challenges. The breakdown of administrative systems led to increased crime and disorder. Elite families began moving away from the capital, seeking security and opportunity in provincial centres or neighbouring kingdoms. This brain drain deprived Angkor of leadership and expertise precisely when they were most needed. Chinese diplomatic records from the Yuan dynasty provide valuable insights into the Khmer Empire's condition during this period. The account of Zhou Daguan, who visited Angkor in 1296 to 1297, describes a still functioning city with active markets, religious ceremonies, and royal processions. Yet careful reading reveals signs of decay, mentions of ruined buildings, reduced military forces, and a king who rarely appeared in public. The empire maintained its ceremonial grandeur, but the substance of power was ebbing away. The succession disputes that plagued the empire in the 14th century reflected deeper structural problems. Without clear succession rules, and with royal authority weakened, rival claimants could divide the nobility and paralyze governments. The reign of Jayavarman III, 1295 to 1308, saw multiple challenges to royal authority, with provincial rebellions and palace coups becoming endemic. Each succession crisis further weakened central institutions and encouraged regional strongmen to assert independence. Economic changes in the broader Southeast Asian region reduced Angkor's commercial importance. Maritime trade routes increasingly bypassed the inland capital in favour of coastal ports. The rise of Ayutthaya as a commercial hub drew merchants and craftsmen away from Angkor. Chinese traders, who had been important partners in Khmer commerce, found new opportunities in Thai kingdoms that offered lower taxes and fewer bureaucratic obstacles. The economic marginalisation of Angkor accelerated its political decline. The cultural production of the late Angkorian period, while less monumental than earlier eras, showed continued creativity and adaptation. Sanskrit literature gave way to vernacular Khmer writing that addressed contemporary concerns rather than mythological themes. Folk traditions that had always existed alongside elite culture became more prominent as royal patronage declined. This democratization of culture, while representing a kind of flowering, also marked the end of the classical tradition that had defined Angkorian civilization. The last significant military expedition from Angkor occurred in 1327, when forces were sent to suppress a rebellion in the eastern provinces. The failure of this campaign demonstrated the empire's military weakness and encouraged further defections. By the mid-14th century, Angkor controlled little beyond the immediate vicinity of the capital. The great empire that had once dominated mainland Southeast Asia had shrunk to a city-state, struggling to maintain its independence. The plague pandemic that swept through Asia in the 14th century, part of the same disease outbreak, known in Europe as the Black Death, may have reached the Khmer Empire. While direct evidence is limited, the demographic catastrophe that befell many Asian societies likely affected Angkor as well. Disease outbreak in the dense urban environment would have been devastating, potentially killing large percentages of the population and disrupting all aspects of society. The psychological trauma of mass mortality would have further undermined confidence in traditional institutions and beliefs. Environmental degradation around Angkor accelerated as administrative breakdown led to uncontrolled exploitation of resources. Deforestation for fuel and construction material led to erosion and changes in local hydrology. The siltation of the Bere system was exacerbated by upstream erosion. Wildlife populations that had provided protein through hunting were depleted. The environmental crisis created a vicious cycle where degradation led to economic hardship, which in turn prevented environmental restoration. The Ayutthayan invasions of the late 14th and early 15th centuries delivered the final blows to Angkor as an imperial capital. The Thai kingdom of Ayutthaya, having consolidated control over the Chao Phraya basin, launched repeated attacks on Angkor. The siege of 1431 resulted in the capture and sacking of the city, though recent scholarship questions whether this was as catastrophic as traditionally portrayed. What seems clear is that Angkor could no longer serve as a secure capital, prompting the Khmer court to relocate to more defensible positions. The abandonment of Angkor was not sudden but occurred over decades, or perhaps centuries. The royal court moved to Phnom Penh, Longvek, and other sites that offered better access to maritime trade and more defensible positions. Parts of Angkor's population followed, while others remained to maintain religious sites and agricultural activities. The great temples continued to function as pilgrimage destinations, with Angkor Wat converted to Theravada Buddhist use. The city that had been the centre of an empire became a provincial town, then a village, and eventually was reclaimed by the forest. The memory of Angkor's greatness persisted in Khmer consciousness even as the physical city decayed. Oral traditions preserved stories of the great kings and their monuments. Chronicles written in later centuries attempted to reconstruct the history of the Angkorian period, though often mixing historical facts with legend and mythology. The temples remained objects of veneration, with local communities maintaining those parts still accessible. This cultural memory would prove crucial for the eventual rediscovery and restoration of Angkor. The factors that led to Angkor's decline were multiple and interconnected, defying simple explanation. Environmental degradation, climate change, economic shifts, religious transformation, military pressure, and political fragmentation all played roles. The very success of the Khmer Empire in creating a complex, interdependent system made it vulnerable when key components failed. The centralization that had enabled great achievements also meant that weakness at the centre affected the entire structure. The 15th century opened with Angkor still nominally the capital of the Khmer kingdom, but the reality of power had shifted fundamentally. The great city that had once commanded an empire stretching across mainland Southeast Asia now struggled to control even its immediate hinterland. The royal court, when it resided at Angkor at all, occupied a fraction of the vast urban complex, with entire districts abandoned to vegetation and wildlife. The transformation from imperial capital to struggling provincial centre occurred not through dramatic catastrophe, but through a slow process of withdrawal, decay, and adaptation that would culminate in the city's effective abandonment as a political centre. The reign of Ponhea Yat, who ruled from approximately 1432 to 1463, marked the definitive end of Angkor's role as the Khmer capital. Following yet another devastating Ayutthayan attack, he made the momentous decision to relocate the court to the region of Phnom Penh, where the Mekong and Tonle Sap rivers converge. This location offered multiple advantages that Angkor no longer possessed: access to maritime trade routes, natural defences provided by the rivers, and distance from the aggressive Ayutthayan kingdom. The move represented not temporary flight, but permanent recognition that Angkor's time had passed. The new capital region around Phnom Penh, Longvek and Udong reflected changed priorities and possibilities. Rather than attempting to recreate Angkor's monumental architecture, the Khmer kings built more modest wooden palaces and temples that could be constructed quickly and abandoned if necessary. The mobility of the capital, shifting between several sites over the following centuries, demonstrated adaptation to a more precarious political environment. The Khmer kingdom had become one power among many rather than the dominant force it had once been. The economic foundations of post-Angkorian Cambodia differed fundamentally from the agricultural empire centred on the Tonle Sap basin. Trade, particularly the export of forest products and the transshipment of goods between the South China Sea and the interior, became increasingly important. The Portuguese, who arrived in the region in the early 16th century, described a kingdom that, while no longer mighty, remained commercially active. Chinese merchants, Malay traders, and later European adventurers found opportunities in this reduced but still viable kingdom. The religious landscape of post-Angkorian Cambodia was dominated by Theravada Buddhism, which had completely supplanted the Hindu-Buddhist synthesis of the classical period. Monks played crucial roles, not just in religious life, but in education, medicine, and even politics. The Sangha, or monastic community, provided social services that the weakened state could no longer supply. Monasteries became centres of learning where classical texts were preserved and copied, maintaining cultural continuity despite political fragmentation. Meanwhile, Angkor itself entered a strange twilight existence, neither fully alive nor completely dead. Parts of the city remained inhabited, with communities maintaining residence near still-functioning temples. Angkor Wat, converted to Theravada Buddhist use, continued to attract pilgrims and monks. Local populations developed new mythologies about the ancient monuments, often forgetting their original builders and purposes. The great city became a place of mystery and legend, its true history obscured by time and transformation. The inscriptions from this period, carved not in Sanskrit but in Khmer and Pali, reveal a society trying to maintain connections with its glorious past while adapting to diminished circumstances. Royal genealogies trace descent from Angkorian kings, even when connections were tenuous or fictional. Temple donations, while modest compared to classical period endowments, showed continued religious devotion. Legal documents demonstrated functioning administrative systems, though operating on a much reduced scale. The 16th century brought new challenges as European powers entered Southeast Asian politics. The Portuguese established trading posts and sought to control maritime commerce. Spanish expeditions from the Philippines explored possibilities for conquest or conversion. While Cambodia avoided direct colonization during this period, European pressure added another layer of complexity to an already difficult situation. The kingdom had to navigate not just regional rivalries but global imperial ambitions. The reign of King Angkor Wat from 1516 to 1566 saw a temporary revival of Khmer power and cultural production. Military victories against Ayutthaya recovered some lost territories, while internal reforms strengthened royal authority. The king patronised literature and art, with the royal chronicles from this period providing valuable historical information. Yet this revival proved temporary, dependent on the exceptional abilities of individual rulers rather than structural strengths. The environmental situation around Angkor continued to deteriorate throughout the 16th century. Without maintenance, the elaborate hydraulic system that had supported intensive agriculture completely broke down. Canals filled with silt, embankments eroded, and the Great Barres became seasonal swamps. The forest reclaimed agricultural lands, with trees growing from temple roofs and vines covering carved facades. Nature was actively erasing the physical traces of empire, though the stone monuments proved remarkably resistant to complete destruction. The arrival of the first European visitors to Angkor in the late 16th century provides external perspectives on the abandoned capital. Portuguese missionary Diogo de Couto, writing in 1586, described ruins so extensive that they seemed beyond human construction. Spanish explorer Gabriel Quiroga de San Antonio, visiting in 1604, found Angkor Wat still functioning as a Buddhist monastery, but surrounded by forest and ruins. These accounts, while often inaccurate in details, confirm that Angkor had become a place of ruins and wonder rather than a living city. The 17th century witnessed the complete political marginalization of Cambodia, squeezed between Vietnamese expansion from the east and continued Thai pressure from the west. The kingdom survived through careful diplomacy, playing stronger neighbours against each other while accepting humiliating tributary relationships. The Khmer kings became pawns in regional power games, with rival factions seeking Vietnamese or Thai support for their claims to the throne. This period of weakness and foreign interference would continue for centuries. Cultural production during this era shifted from monumental architecture to more portable forms of expression. Literature, particularly poetry and religious texts, flourished despite political troubles. The Rimka, the Khmer version of the Ramayana, was elaborated and refined, becoming a cornerstone of Cambodian cultural identity. Classical dance traditions, maintained in royal and religious contexts, preserved ancient stories and aesthetic values. These cultural forms, requiring fewer resources than temple construction, proved more sustainable in straitened circumstances. The demographic situation in the former Angkorian heartland reflected broader population movements. Many Khmer migrated to more secure or prosperous regions, either within the reduced kingdom or in neighbouring territories. Vietnamese settlers moved into the Mekong Delta, gradually transforming previously Khmer territories into Vietnamese provinces. Thai influence expanded in western provinces, with populations adopting Thai language and customs. The ethnic homogeneity that had characterized the Angkorian core gave way to a more complex demographic mosaic. The 18th century saw Cambodia at its nadir, with the kingdom virtually partitioned between Vietnam and Siam, Thailand. The Khmer court became so weak that rival kings were simultaneously crowned by different foreign patrons. Vietnamese administrators controlled eastern provinces, while Thai governors ruled western territories. The Rump Khmer state maintained nominal independence, but exercised little real authority. This period of national humiliation contrasted painfully with memories of past greatness. Yet even in this dark period, Angkor remained a powerful symbol in Khmer consciousness. Oral traditions preserved stories of the great kings and their monuments. Pilgrims continued to visit Angkor Wat and other accessible temples, maintaining religious continuity. Local communities developed elaborate mythologies about the ruins, often attributing their construction to gods or giants rather than human builders. These legends, while historically inaccurate, kept alive the sense that something extraordinary had occurred in these places. The French colonial period, beginning in 1863, brought renewed attention to Angkor, but under circumstances that the Khmer kings could never have imagined. French explorers, scholars, and administrators rediscovered Angkor, though it had never been truly lost to local populations. The colonial narrative of rescuing forgotten monuments from the jungle obscured the continuous Khmer relationship with these sites. French restoration efforts, while preserving structures from complete collapse, also imposed European ideas about authenticity and presentation. The École Française d'Extrême-Orient, established in 1900, began systematic study and restoration of Angkorian monuments. French archaeologists cleared vegetation, stabilized structures, and attempted to reconstruct original appearances. These efforts, despite their colonial context, preserved monuments that might otherwise have been lost. The restoration of Angkor Wat, Bayon, and other major temples created tourist destinations that would become symbols of Cambodian national identity. The 20th century transformation of Angkor from ruins to World Heritage Site represents another chapter in the site's long history. Independence in 1953 allowed Cambodians to reclaim their monuments, though political instability limited conservation efforts. The Khmer Rouge period, 1975-1979, saw destruction and neglect, with some monuments damaged by warfare and looting. The subsequent restoration efforts, supported by international cooperation, have stabilized major structures while raising new questions about development, tourism, and cultural preservation. Modern archaeological research has revolutionized understanding of Angkor's extent and complexity. LiDAR technology has revealed the full urban landscape beneath the forest canopy, showing that Angkor was even larger than previously imagined. Environmental studies have clarified the role of climate change and ecological degradation in the city's decline. These scientific investigations, combined with continued epigraphic and art historical research, are reconstructing the story of Angkor with unprecedented detail. The contemporary relationship between Cambodians and Angkor reflects both pride and complexity. The monuments appear on the national flag and currency, serving as symbols of national identity and past greatness. Tourism to Angkor provides crucial economic benefits, but also creates pressures on conservation and local communities. The challenge of preserving Angkor while allowing sustainable development mirrors broader tensions in Cambodian society between tradition and modernization. The lessons of Angkor's decline and abandonment resonate with contemporary concerns about sustainability, climate change, and urban planning. The collapse of the elaborate hydraulic system that supported Angkor's population offers warnings about infrastructure maintenance and environmental management. The role of climate variability in undermining agricultural systems parallels current anxieties about global warming. The fragmentation of political authority that preceded abandonment suggests the importance of effective governance for urban survival. The story of Angkor's final centuries is not simply one of decline and fall, but of transformation and adaptation. The Khmer people did not disappear when their great capital was abandoned. They adapted to new circumstances, preserved their cultural traditions, and eventually reclaimed their history. The monuments of Angkor, despite centuries of neglect, survived to inspire new generations. The empire ended, but the civilization endured, transformed but not destroyed. Today, Angkor stands as one of humanity's greatest archaeological treasures, attracting millions of visitors who marvel at its temples and ponder its history. The site that was once the centre of an empire, then an abandoned ruin, has become a symbol of human achievement and resilience. The story of its rise, glory, decline, and rediscovery reminds us that civilizations, like the temples they build, can endure even when the conditions that created them have long passed. The Khmer Empire's 1,000-year journey from emergence to abandonment encompasses triumph and tragedy, innovation and tradition, expansion and contraction. The farmers who first settled along the Mekong could never have imagined that their descendants would build Angkor Wat. The kings who ruled from Angkor at its height could not have foreseen that their capital would be reclaimed by forest. Yet through all these transformations, something essential persisted: the human capacity to create meaning and beauty even in the face of impermanence. As the morning mist lifts from the moat surrounding Angkor Wat, revealing those 5 iconic towers reaching toward the sky, we come to the end of our journey through the remarkable story of the Khmer Empire. From its humble beginnings along the rivers of Southeast Asia to its emergence as one of the world's most sophisticated civilizations, from its golden age of power and artistic achievement to its gradual decline and the abandonment of its great capital, this has been a tale of human ambition, creativity, and resilience that continues to inspire wonder nearly 1,000 years after Angkor's zenith. The legacy of the Khmer Empire extends far beyond the magnificent monuments that draw visitors from around the world. In the agricultural techniques that still sustain rural communities across Southeast Asia, in the religious and cultural traditions that shape daily life in Cambodia and neighbouring countries, in the artistic motifs that appear in contemporary design, and in the very conception of divine kingship and political authority that influenced the region for centuries, we see the enduring impact of Khmer civilization. The empire may have dissolved, but its cultural DNA persists, woven into the fabric of Southeast Asian life. What the Khmer achieved during their centuries of greatness stands as testament to human potential. They transformed a challenging tropical environment into one of the most productive agricultural systems of the pre-modern world. They developed engineering solutions that managed water resources on a scale that wouldn't be matched until the industrial age. They created art that ranks among humanity's greatest achievements, carving entire mythologies into stone with such skill that the figures seem ready to step from the walls. They built monuments that have survived centuries of neglect, warfare, and tropical decay to stand as eternal witnesses to their builder's vision. The story of the Khmer Empire reminds us that civilizations are not permanent fixtures, but dynamic processes, constantly adapting to changing circumstances. The same innovative spirit that allowed the early Khmer to synthesize Indian, Chinese, and indigenous influences into a distinctive culture enabled their descendants to survive the empire's collapse and preserve their identity through centuries of foreign domination. The flexibility that characterized Khmer religion, allowing Hindu and Buddhist traditions to coexist and enrich each other, provided resilience when rigid orthodoxies might have led to complete fragmentation. Understanding the Khmer Empire's decline offers crucial insights for our contemporary world. The breakdown of the elaborate water management system that supported Angkor's population demonstrates the importance of infrastructure maintenance and the dangers of overexploiting environmental resources. The role of climate change in undermining agricultural productivity resonates with current concerns about global warming and food security. The political fragmentation that preceded Angkor's abandonment illustrates how the failure of central authority can cascade through complex systems, leading to general collapse. Yet the story of the Khmer Empire is ultimately not one of failure, but of extraordinary human achievement and endurance. The civilization that built Angkor Wat and the Bayon, that engineered the Great Berets and constructed thousands of temples across Southeast Asia, left an indelible mark on human history. Even in decline, even in the abandonment of their greatest city, the Khmer people demonstrated remarkable resilience, adapting to new circumstances while preserving the essence of their cultural identity. The temples may have been reclaimed by the jungle, but the spirit that built them lived on in the communities that remembered, in the stories that were passed down, in the dances that continue to be performed, and in the prayers that continue to be offered. Consider what the Khmer Empire accomplished during its 6 centuries of greatness. At a time when Europe was emerging from what historians once called the Dark Ages, when the Americas were seeing the rise of the Maya and the predecessors of the Inca, the Khmer were creating one of the most sophisticated urban complexes the world had ever seen. The greater Angkor region supported a population that may have exceeded 1 million people, making it one of the largest pre-industrial urban centres in human history. This was achieved not through conquest alone, but through innovation in agriculture, engineering, and social organisation that allowed dense populations to thrive in a challenging tropical environment. The artistic legacy of the Khmer Empire continues to influence and inspire. The distinctive style developed by Khmer sculptors, with its perfect balance of idealization and naturalism, its subtle expressions of spiritual transcendence, and its masterful integration of narrative and decoration, represents one of humanity's great artistic traditions. Contemporary Cambodian artists still draw inspiration from Angkorian motifs, while architects and designers worldwide study Khmer monuments for insights into proportion, symbolism, and the integration of built environments with natural landscapes. The religious and philosophical contributions of the Khmer Empire shaped the spiritual landscape of Southeast Asia. The synthesis of Hinduism and Buddhism achieved at Angkor created new forms of religious expression that continue to influence practice throughout the region. The concept of the Bodhisattva king introduced by Jayavarman II, combining political authority with compassionate service to all beings, offered an alternative model of governance that emphasized moral responsibility over divine right. These ideas, transmitted through texts, art, and oral tradition, enrich the spiritual vocabulary of Southeast Asian Buddhism. The technological innovations developed by the Khmer continue to offer lessons for our modern world. Their water management systems, which successfully captured and distributed monsoon rains to support year-round agriculture, demonstrate sustainable engineering principles that contemporary planners study for insights into water conservation and distribution. The construction techniques that allowed temples to stand for a millennium in a tropical environment that rapidly destroys most human structures provide models for durable architecture. Perhaps most remarkably, the Khmer Empire demonstrated that cultural synthesis and adaptation, rather than rigid adherence to tradition, can be sources of strength. Throughout their history, the Khmer absorbed influences from India, China, Java, and neighbouring cultures, transforming foreign elements into distinctively Khmer expressions. This openness to external ideas, combined with confidence in their own cultural identity, allowed them to create something genuinely new rather than merely imitating others. In our increasingly interconnected world, this model of creative cultural synthesis offers valuable lessons about maintaining identity while embracing change. The story of Angkor's rediscovery in the modern era adds another layer to this remarkable narrative. The temples that had been abandoned to the jungle became symbols of national pride and identity for modern Cambodia. The restoration and study of these monuments has not only preserved them for future generations, but has also helped Cambodians reconnect with their history after the traumas of colonialism, war, and genocide. Angkor has become a bridge between past and present, reminding Cambodians and the world of what human beings can achieve when vision, resources, and determination align. The challenges facing Angkor today mirror broader tensions in our globalized world. How do we preserve cultural heritage while allowing for economic development? How do we make ancient sites accessible to visitors while protecting them from damage? How do we balance the needs of local communities with international conservation standards? These questions, being worked out daily at Angkor, reflect universal challenges in managing cultural resources in the 21st century. The solutions being developed at Angkor, through collaboration between Cambodian authorities and international partners, may provide models for heritage management worldwide. The environmental lessons from the Khmer Empire's rise and decline have particular relevance in our era of climate change and ecological crisis. The success of the Khmer agricultural system depended on predictable monsoons and careful management of water resources. When climate patterns shifted and the infrastructure for water management broke down, the foundation of Khmer prosperity crumbled. Today, as we face unprecedented environmental challenges, the Khmer experience reminds us of both the importance of environmental management and the vulnerability of even the most sophisticated civilizations to ecological disruption. The human dimension of the Khmer story, the lives of millions of ordinary people who built, maintained, and ultimately outlived the empire, deserves our reflection and respect. These were not merely anonymous labourers serving royal ambition, but individuals with their own hopes, fears, loves, and losses. They raised families, celebrated festivals, mourned their dead, and found meaning in their daily struggles. Their descendants today, whether living in the shadow of Angkor's temples or scattered across the global Cambodian diaspora, carry forward this human legacy, maintaining traditions that link them to ancestors who walked the causeways of Angkor Thom and prayed in the galleries of Angkor Wat. The influence of Khmer civilization extends throughout Southeast Asia in ways both obvious and subtle. The scripts used in Thailand and Laos derive from Khmer writing systems. Architectural styles developed at Angkor influenced temple construction from Burma to Java. Legal codes and administrative practices pioneered by Khmer kings shaped governance throughout the region. The spread of Theravada Buddhism, facilitated by infrastructure and institutions created during the Angkorian period, transformed the religious landscape of mainland Southeast Asia. These influences, often unrecognized, demonstrate the profound and lasting impact of Khmer civilization. As we contemplate the ruins of Angkor, those magnificent structures that have survived centuries of neglect to inspire wonder in our modern age, we might ask what monuments our own civilization will leave for future generations. Will our glass and steel towers survive as long as Angkor's sandstone temples? Will our digital archives preserve our stories as effectively as stone inscriptions? Will future archaeologists marvel at our achievements or puzzle over our failures? The Khmer Empire reminds us that all civilizations, no matter how powerful, are temporary, but that the greatest among them leave legacies that transcend their political existence. The story of the Khmer Empire also speaks to the resilience of human culture in the face of catastrophe. The collapse of Angkor could have meant the end of Khmer civilization, the complete disappearance of a people and their traditions. Instead, the Khmer adapted, survived, and eventually thrived again. Through centuries of foreign domination, through the horrors of the Khmer Rouge regime that sought to erase history itself, through poverty and struggle, the Cambodian people have maintained their connection to the great civilization that built Angkor. This resilience, this refusal to let their history be forgotten, stands as testament to the enduring power of cultural memory. In the faces carved on the bayon, with their enigmatic smiles that seem to hold secrets we can never fully understand, we see reflected our own search for meaning and permanence. The kings who commissioned these monuments sought immortality through stone, and in a sense they achieved it. Jayavarman II's face, multiplied 200 times on the towers of the bayon, still gazes out over the landscape he once ruled. Jayavarman II lives on in the bas-reliefs of Angkor Wat that depict his victories and aspirations. The economic model of the Khmer Empire, based on intensive agriculture supported by sophisticated water management, offers both inspiration and warning for contemporary development. The Khmer demonstrated that it was possible to support dense populations in tropical environments through careful resource management and technological innovation. However, they also showed the vulnerabilities of such systems when pushed beyond their limits or when external conditions change. As our world grapples with feeding growing populations while managing environmental resources sustainably, the Khmer experience provides valuable historical perspective. The role of religion in Khmer society, simultaneously a source of unity and division, resonates with contemporary debates about faith and politics. The Khmer kings used religion to legitimize their rule and unite diverse populations under common symbols and rituals. Yet religious changes also created conflicts that weakened the empire at crucial moments. The relatively peaceful transition from Hinduism to Buddhism in Cambodia, despite periods of tension, offers a model of religious evolution that avoided the violent sectarian conflicts that plagued other societies. This history suggests that religious pluralism and adaptation, rather than rigid orthodoxy, may better serve diverse societies. The gender dynamics of Khmer society, with women playing significant roles in commerce, religion, and even politics, challenge simplistic narratives about pre-modern patriarchy. While Khmer society was certainly hierarchical and male-dominated in many respects, women exercised considerable agency within their spheres of influence. Queens like Indra Devi were renowned scholars, female merchants dominated local markets, and women served as religious specialists and healers. This complex picture reminds us that gender relations in historical societies were often more nuanced than modern stereotypes suggest. The story of the Khmer Empire ultimately transcends the specific history of Cambodia to speak to universal human experiences and aspirations. The desire to create lasting monuments, to understand our place in the cosmos, to build prosperous and just societies, to leave something meaningful for future generations. These impulses that drove the Khmer drive us still. Their successes inspire us to attempt great things, while their failures remind us of the importance of sustainability, adaptability, and humility in the face of forces beyond human control. As we reach the end of this journey through the history of the Khmer Empire, from its origins in the early centuries of the Common Era to the abandonment of Angkor and beyond, we have witnessed one of humanity's great civilizational adventures. We have seen kings and commoners, priests and soldiers, artists and engineers, men and women, all contributing to the creation of something extraordinary. We have observed the rise of mighty Angkor, its centuries of glory, and its eventual decline, not as a simple morality tale, but as a complex historical process involving countless individual decisions and actions. The Khmer Empire reminds us that human civilizations are not static entities, but dynamic processes, constantly changing in response to internal developments and external pressures. The empire that Jayavarman II founded in 802 was fundamentally different from the one Jayavarman VII ruled 4 centuries later, which in turn differed from the kingdom that abandoned Angkor in the 15th century. Yet through all these transformations, something essential persisted, a cultural core that we can recognize as distinctively Khmer. This continuity within change offers hope that our own civilizations can adapt to future challenges while maintaining their essential values and identities. Today, as tourists from around the world watch the sun rise over Angkor Wat, as archaeologists uncover new secrets beneath the forest floor, as Cambodian students learn about their heritage, and as monks continue to pray in temples their ancestors built, the Khmer Empire lives on. Not as a political entity, but as an inspiration, a mystery, a source of pride, and a reminder of what human beings can accomplish. The empire that once ruled from the mountains to the sea may have vanished, but its legacy endures in stone and spirit, in art and memory, in the very landscape of Southeast Asia that still bears the marks of Khmer ambition and achievement. The story of the Khmer Empire teaches us that greatness is not measured only in territorial extent or military power, but in the lasting contributions a civilization makes to human culture and knowledge. By this measure, the Khmer Empire ranks among the greatest civilizations in human history. Their temples continue to inspire architects, their art influences designers, their hydraulic engineering provides models for water management, and their history offers lessons for our contemporary world. Most importantly, their example reminds us that human creativity and determination can transform even the most challenging environments into centres of civilization. As we close this narrative, we might imagine standing atop the central tower of Angkor Wat, looking out over the forest that now covers what was once the world's largest pre-industrial city. In the distance, other temple towers rise above the canopy, each marking a moment in the long history of Khmer civilization. Below, the geometric precision of moats and causeways speaks to the ordered vision that created this remarkable place. The sounds of modern life, motorcycles and cell phones, mix with timeless sounds of birds and wind, reminding us that history is not something separate from the present, but the foundation on which we build our futures. The Khmer Empire's story does not end with the abandonment of Angkor, or even with the present day. As long as people continue to visit these monuments, to study their history, to draw inspiration from their achievements, and to learn from their experiences, the civilization that built them remains alive in human consciousness. Each generation discovers Angkor anew, finding in these ancient stones reflections of their own concerns and aspirations. The empire that sought permanence through stone achieved it, though perhaps not in the way its builders intended. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the remarkable history of the Khmer Empire. If you found this exploration of one of history's most fascinating civilizations enlightening, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell so you won't miss future episodes where we dive deep into the stories that shaped our world. Share this video with anyone you think might be interested in learning about the incredible achievements of the Khmer people and the magnificent civilization they created. Your support helps us continue bringing these important historical narratives to life. Until next time, remember that the past is not dead history, but living memory, and in understanding the stories of those who came before us, we better understand ourselves and our place in the continuing human story.